finite is the human memory, do you think? I know it sounds a little odd, but I was puzzling this over the weekend. I read a rather splendid interview with our friend and colleague Johnny Vaughan, who was suggesting that the reason why he can't remember anything is because there's only a finite amount of space in our memory banks with which we can actually record stuff. And it is obviously remarkable this morning that the fifth Prime Minister in 4 years is making his way to Downing Street. Events that you can watch unfold live on YouTube, live on the Global Player, live on the LBC app. Unfortunately, the unfolding events will be punctuated by large periods in which the only thing you'll be able to see is my fizzog. But some people enjoy that. Some people sign up for it. But don't forget, you know, this is radio with pictures. And I can't remember the previous ones. I have sort of vague memories of helicopters floating around the place and cars making their way to and from number 10 Downing Street. I could now spend the best part of an hour describing scenes on Downing Street, which essentially involve a door. I'm dropping some trivia about the door. There's no letterbox on down. Did you know that, Keith? There's no letterbox on number 10 Downing Street, because when the postman arrives, I don't think he comes around the front, does he, the postman? But if he did, then they just open the door and he'd take all the packages. I wonder if they get as many Amazon deliveries as we do at the moment, such is the delight of having teenage daughters. So I could describe the door. Some broadcasters will be doing that. They will be treating you for the foreseeable future with descriptions of entirely unchanging scenes involving doors and... I mean, listen, I'm in the state-of-the-art studios in Westminster that LBC now enjoys, but I don't think we've currently got a helicopter. I don't know whether we need to send a memo upstairs or something. So this time, by the time we get a next Prime Minister, which, as things are going, will probably be before Christmas, could we please have a helicopter? In fact, I would be prepared to do the show from a helicopter, if that were something that the insurers were prepared to go along with. But so, yes, one broadcaster essentially featuring scenes from a helicopter. There's the Houses of Parliament and Big Ben. Did you know that Big Ben is in fact the name of the bell and not the name of the tower, as many people continue to believe? And this is why they pay us the big the big bucks. It's our helicopter shot, apparently, I've just been told. So I've already made my first mistake, and it's 6 minutes after 10. Watch all my mistakes unfold live this morning on YouTube, on the Global Player, and, of course, on the LBC app. That's one. I suspect that Keith will be keeping count. Are you keeping count, Keith? That's one down. One big mistake made. Goodness knows how many to go. So the reason I mention memory is because I can't remember how different it feels when we go through periods of comparative stability. For example, we're often tempted to point out 14 years of Tory rule between 2010 and 2024. But in many ways, they were just as, from 2016 onwards, they were just as febrile and feverish as now, as anything else. So there wasn't really stability then. We had stability of sorts between 1997 and 2008, when Tony Blair essentially succumbed to internal and external pressure and cleared the way for Gordon Brown. And Gordon Brown, given the fact that he'd been Chancellor for the previous decade and a bit, he was unlikely to embark upon a radically different policy platform from the man who had been Prime Minister previously. So that would be your last example of comparative stability. And yet even that doesn't really sit in the memory as an easily accessible moment, as an easily accessible period. It is ridiculous when you look at other countries that we are now embarking upon a day in which the fifth Prime Minister in 4 years will be installed. That includes, of course, Liz Truss, who was only there for 27 minutes, but nonetheless who gets to call herself a former Prime Minister for the rest of her ridiculous life. And I don't think we can even chalk her up as an anomaly, because she was actually elected in a genuine contest by the members of the Conservative Party, who at the time, I think, found the prospect of a brown-skinned leader utterly unconscionable, a prejudice that they had overcome, possibly as a consequence of Rishi Sunak showing what they could have won, by the time Kemi Badenoch stood against honest Bob Jenrick. So this sense of chaos almost, this certain sense of flux, this sense of instability, this sense of not quite unreliability, but just this sense of shakiness seems to me currently to typify UK politics. And I would very much like... Blair left in 2007. Keith, that's two mistakes. Blair left in 2007, not 2008. I want you to tell me why. I'm not persuaded that the country has, as it is becoming fashionable to suggest, that the country has become ungovernable. It can't have become ungovernable, or if it has to become governable again sometime sooner rather than later. Otherwise, we're all, to paraphrase Dad's Army, we're all doomed. So I'm not persuaded that it's become ungovernable, but I do wonder whether the rubric of government has thus far failed to catch up with the combination of public and media coverage. Let me rephrase that, or at least let me clarify. So I'm thinking that governments, whether you're looking at, I suppose Rishi Sunak managed, but Rishi Sunak, of course, by dint of being a Conservative, didn't have much of the UK's media baying for his blood from pretty much the moment he arrived in Downing Street. You won't believe me when I tell you, but you can check quite easily on the internet. But they were praising Liz Truss to the rafters up until the moment that the economy essentially exploded. That's how bent and biased our media is. And yes, newspapers don't exert the influence that they used to exert, but by the time you've stopped counting the influence that they exert on public discourse, the influence they exert on broadcasters, even broadcasters like me, who can clearly see how ridiculous and biased it all is, you can recognise how Rishi Sunak was able to at least present a semblance of stability and calm, largely because there wasn't an article in almost every newspaper almost every day explaining how he was doomed and he was imminently to be departing and the knives were being sharpened, and because he'd accepted some free spectacles from a billionaire, he couldn't possibly continue as Prime Minister in all conscience. So part of the problem is specific to the party, as in why has Keir Starmer gone, but part of the problem has got to be bigger and deeper than that, because that switch from May to Johnson, from Johnson to Truss, from Truss to Sunak, and then from Starmer to Burnham speaks of something deeper and something that transcends and defies party politics. There is something very strange going on in the United Kingdom, and it is a sense that we can change our Prime Minister almost as often as we change our socks, without ever actually changing much. And that's what I want you to address for me first this morning. Just very simply, why is the United Kingdom a country where we can have 5 prime ministers in 4 years? There's two ways into it. What has happened or what is happening? We're not ungovernable, but there feels to me to be some sort of disconnect between what is plausible and possible and what is promised. It is as if people are chalking up problems that are a consequence of much bigger trends and tides to the inhabitants of Downing Street or to the party of the moment, but nothing really seems to change profoundly when we change party. So 9 prime ministers in just under 20 years. When you think that Tony Blair and Margaret Thatcher between them, and John Major had a fairly decent stretch as well. It used to be a truism of UK politics from 1979 onwards that prime ministers stayed in post for quite a long time. And that all began to change essentially in 2008 or 2007 or 2010, if you prefer. But I want you to tell me why. And I want you to tell me anything, really. I'm just glancing around. I've mentioned the media. The Daily Mail this morning inevitably already tries to sow division and unhappiness. Burnham doesn't speak for us, say voters in South. These ludicrous polls that are constantly conducted are framed in such a way as to deliver precisely the front page that newspapers like the Daily Mail want. So you don't turn up with your clipboard and ask objective, interesting, insightful questions designed to paint a picture of the country that we actually live in. You turn up with carefully constructed questions designed to deliver negative conclusions that speak of division and unhappiness and all the rest of it. So they've got what they wanted, but that's part of the problem, isn't it? You think about how quickly it began with Keir Starmer, and it didn't happen at all with Boris Johnson. So Boris Johnson can be, I think, the worst Prime Minister we'll ever have, worse in many ways than Liz Truss, but we can leave that to the historians of the future. You can watch that happen, and then when you look at our media, they are tickling his toes and treating him like the Messiah right up until the moment that his own party throw him out. And of course, when they did throw him out, he went immediately to work for the Daily Mail as a columnist. So something about Keir Starmer's departure has to be linked to political coverage. But if you remove the partisanship from the picture, there is a sense that political journalists have become addicted to flux. Flux is a good word. You have to be very careful to pronounce the L, otherwise Keith's tally of mistakes that I've made on the programme will be up to 3 and Ofcom will be on the phone. But this flux, the political correspondents have become addicted to flux. Because if you've got somebody in power for 10 years, you are not going to be filing copy every couple of weeks about how the writing's on the wall and here are the runners and riders to replace the current Prime Minister. We have all perhaps become addicted to that. We're all living in a world where we talk about the possibility of a Prime Minister going months, years earlier than we would have done in the past. It's become feasible. I think Liz Truss probably broke that model more than anybody else, where you suddenly start thinking, well, they can actually go after 6 weeks. Therefore, it's not ridiculous to be writing articles or having phone-ins or conducting conversations about the imminent disappearance of a sitting Prime Minister within minutes of them arriving in Downing Street. And I think that I think Keir Starmer might have been the first victim of that. By the time Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, everybody probably wanted a period of peace. And because he isn't going to be the victim of right-wing propaganda, he was allowed to stay there for a while until, of course, he lost the general election. But Keir Starmer, possibly the first victim of a political landscape in which everybody thinks it's perfectly normal to start suggesting that the writing's on the wall within minutes of them arriving in Downing Street. So there's answer number 1 to the question of why we've had 5 Prime Ministers in 4 years, or why we will soon have had 5 Prime Ministers in 4 years. I'm going to write down flux addiction. I'm also going to write down constant opinion polling, which I think is the cousin of flux addiction. Constant opinion polling, as if it matters. Why does an opinion poll looking at what the result of the next general election might be matter 4 or 5 years out from when the next general election is likely to be? Again, Keir Starmer, not the first, but possibly the biggest victim of that. Labour MPs eventually reaching the point where they thought, well, we can't carry on like this because poll after poll after poll after poll tells us and tells me that I'm about to lose my seat. So, flux addiction and constant opinion polling. Obviously, a completely bent media. I mean, it is even beyond exaggeration how ridiculous it is for people who claim to be informed or honest, writing about how brilliant Liz Truss will be, and then just changing the cartridge in their fountain pens and writing about how Keir Starmer is a threat to civilization as we know it. There's a reason why Unhinged Headline has become such a popular feature. So, flux addiction, constant opinion polling, bent media. Glancing at my inbox, there is an enormously popular answer to this question that I haven't mentioned yet. No prizes for guessing what it is, but you can't just say the word or indeed write the word. You have to put flesh upon those Brexit bones. You have to tell me why Brexit, which I'm going to put down as reason number 4, has contributed to an environment in which we can have, as we are about to see today, our 5th Prime Minister in 4 years. I mean, that's utterly unprecedented. Even when there was a little bit more flux in UK politics, you would see the same Prime Minister coming back for a second crack of the whip after seeing his first crack fail. So Wilson, I suppose, he would be the best example of that. You didn't change leader and change Prime Minister as regularly as most people change their underwear. So that's your kind of kick-off. We've got an addiction to flux. We are, partly because of that addiction, setting far too much store by opinion polls. Opinion polls should probably be banned until a year before a general election. It would be bad for me, be bad for business. It would make the job of political journalism much harder because they write thousands and thousands of words about opinion polls. But what purpose do they serve for the UK public? What possible point is there to an opinion poll telling you about something that would happen in 5 years' time if the thing that's scheduled to happen in 5 years' time actually happened tomorrow? It doesn't happen in any other area of life. So flux addiction, constant opinion polling, bent media and Brexit. Pick one of those or give me your own. Why is our beloved country, and that was one of the things I liked about Andy Burnham's speech on Friday, the way he talked about how he loved the country and all different corners of it and different accents and different regions and different areas. Every part of this country has something to celebrate, something beautiful. Some of them, of course, are harder to find than others, but I'm very much Team Burnham when it comes to the beauty of Britain. So why has our beautiful country become a place where prime ministers change almost as regularly as the guards at Buckingham Palace? To where I will be directing your attention later in the programme, when first Keir Starmer goes there to essentially hand in his cards, and later Andy Burnham arrives to receive the King's blessing, if you like, for his imminent formation of a new government. We're expecting that at about 11:15. Keir Starmer will deliver a speech, then he'll head to Buckingham Palace. This is roughly when I go full Dimbleby. About an hour and a half later or thereabouts, Andy Burnham will return from Buckingham Palace to Downing Street and deliver a speech on those steps. And throughout all of it, I will be asking you why we have become a country in which nobody seems to be absolutely stunned or staggered that we're about to have our fifth Prime Minister in 4 years. What's happened and what is happening? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 22 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where possibly another little word on the significance of this situation. It is, to say the least, suboptimal that we are changing. I mean, imagine if we changed the England manager 5 times in 4 years. I don't think we'll be talking much about the World Cup today, except to say, thank goodness Spain won. But imagine if we changed the England manager 5 times in 4 years. What would that feel like? What would the national conversation be? What would the likelihood of us performing well in a tournament like the World Cup be? Would it increase or decrease if we were literally changing the manager and therefore changing the tactics 5 times in 4 years? What if your boss changed 5 times in 4 years? Obviously, I don't know what you do for a living, but imagine if your boss changed 5 times in 4 years. I've been very blessed in my time at LBC in that I've had a relatively small number of bosses, but they have been very different. I've had a boss who thought that beet the sweet was the best thing since sliced bread. That was when people used to ring in and try to guess what sweet I was eating live on the radio, to which I could only answer their questions with an affirmative or a negative. It would be yes or no. I then had a boss who thought that it would be a good idea not to talk about the news every day, to kind of steer the conversation into more personal issues so that the news would not be the Bible from which we took our daily lesson. And then latterly, and between you and me, much more successfully and happily, I've had bosses who think that you want to tune into informed and interesting conversations about current affairs. But that's 3 completely different ideologies, if you like, that we have had to embrace as presenters on the same radio station with essentially the same audience. Imagine if that was happening 5 times in 4 years. You're getting a completely different message from upstairs about what they want us to do in front of this microphone. So that's football. That's your job. That's life in general. It's hugely important. And yet, we're just baking it in, aren't we? It's just become part of our life. Why are we a country in which 5 prime ministers in 4 years barely raises eyebrows anymore? Chris is in Sunderland. Chris, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. I really think I've got a lot of animosity towards the Conservatives, who's made it normalised now for short-termism, where the prime ministers are treated like football managers. If there's no satisfaction in the job that they're doing, they're just out. When
did that start? It didn't used to be like that.
It didn't, no, and you hit the nail on the head before when you were talking about the previous Labour government. There was a period of stability. Tony Blair was in for 10 years, Gordon Brown. When they lost the election and David Cameron got in, it was okay for a while until Brexit happened. Brexit was just...
Well, it was your fault, mate. You're in Sunderland.
How dare you?
Why? Because, I bow to few people in my understanding of what a ridiculous exercise Brexit was and continues to be. But it was 10 years ago. Why has Brexit affected... Why do you put Brexit near the top of the list of things that explain how we have become a country in which 5 prime ministers in 4 years feels kind of normal?
It's hard to explain, but I think the timeline of since Brexit happened and David Cameron left office, we've had that revolving door, and again, it's short-termism, and I think perhaps Parliament's become addicted to it. The neither leaders when they do, again. It's
but why would Brexit do that? I'm going to badger the witness a bit here. Why would Brexit do that? Because I think that your diagnosis is correct, but I don't know why Brexit is the cause. So I joked on Friday, I stole the line off Simon Marks, actually, but I did credit him, which is a bit progress as far as I'm concerned. How long will it be before we start having conversations about how long Andy Burnham's got, or does Andy Burnham need to go? And I joked that my 11 o'clock phone in today would be, is it time for Andy Burnham to resign? Of course, he won't actually have assumed the position by then, but, the point stands. And that's true in Parliament. Politicians, obviously, it's one of the reasons why he's so keen to ban briefing, which... good luck with that, Andy. And it is obviously true of journalists who have become addicted to flux.
Oh, I agree, yes.
But why would Brexit be such and this is a question other people can answer as well on 0345 60973. Why would Brexit be such a driver of the flux addiction?
Well, a lot of things changed after Brexit, didn't it?
Yes.
It's changed the mindset of not just politicians, but the public as well.
Yes.
And it's hard to explain why. I struggle to put a finger on what changed in our country after Brexit. But I think back to that period of time, doesn't it?
You're nudging me towards it, actually. You're getting my little grey cells whirring. And I think this is also why Donald Trump loved Brexit. Because it showed...
That's another thing as well, because obviously that was around the time when Donald Trump got in and MAGA politics started influencing our country.
So vibes took over. Brexit taught the world
all that talk about sovereignty and foreign interference, yet the right seemed to love.
12 managers how many managers have Sunderland had in the last 5 years?
I've lost count.
But it's double figures, isn't it? Or thereabouts?
Yeah.
So there you go. That is, you are the analogy made flesh, Chris. Sunderland Football Club, demonstrating precisely how bonkers this would be in the context of anything else except politics. I wonder whether, and I don't necessarily want Brexit to be top of this list, but I wonder whether Brexit taught the world that a supposedly informed and educated electorate could end up voting against all observable evidence and facts. And in that world, nothing sticks. In that world, flux is inevitable. In that world, vibes are transcendent. Why on earth are we going to do that? Because we feel like it. We're going to change Prime Minister because we feel like it. I think you can deliver what I want overnight, like the referendum result was delivered overnight and everybody started celebrating. It's only in the ensuing decade that they've realised they had absolutely nothing to celebrate. But we've become addicted to the quick fix, the quick hit. And if you're addicted to quick fixes, Chris, then of course you're going to change Prime Minister every 20 minutes.
Yeah, but then again, that comes down to the politicians who are driving it, isn't it? And with the short-termism, I think, is part of them looking after their own positions in government, in Parliament. They want these quick fixes to save their own skin, in effect. And that affects the country as well, because they see it happening. And
then subconsciously, enough people think, and probably, I don't want to sound patronising, maybe we all feel this to various degrees, subconsciously we all think things can be done overnight. And then, of course, you have populist politicians promising to deliver the world yesterday. I think we're going to add quick fixes to the list, aren't we?
Yeah, it's the kind of mindset that everybody's settled into now. And
I think you might be right.
It's not good because it's not working.
No. And look at every other area of life. Look at football. Look at business. Look at your job. Look at my job. Look at absolutely anything, and tell me. Look at a warship. Look at the Navy. Look at the Army, and tell me that changing the top man or woman 5 times in 4 years is not a recipe for, if not disaster, then certainly suboptimal situations. I love that. So now we've got flux addiction, which I suspect I'm not the only one who suddenly starts thinking of Back to the Future at the appearance of the word flux. Constant opinion polling. I'd like you to put more flesh on those bones. A bent media. We go on about that a lot on this programme because somebody has to, but it is also true. Brexit. But more as a sort of symptom. Brexit needs more work as well. And then quick fixes. Because if you're addicted to quick fixes, it's a bit like self-help books. You're addicted to them. Why do you need 10 self-help books? Nobody should own more than one self-help book. Because if self-help books work, you only need one. Am I right? Why are there shelves and shelves and shelves of self-help books in Waterstones? There should only be one self-help book, so we're addicted to quick fixes. Well, that hasn't worked, but I still believe in quick fixes, so let's have another go. I'm not minded currently to take your calls on why it all went so wrong for Keir Starmer, but it underpins the conversation that we're having, I think. The time now is 10:30. You are listening to, and indeed watching, James O'Brien, not just on LBC, but also broadcasting live from Westminster on YouTube, the LBC app, and Global Player, no definite article. Natasha Clark will be joining me live from Downing Street in just a moment to, well, essentially to say again in a slightly different order things she's already said at least 3 times today. Here's Dominic Ellis with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's one of the great truisms of journalism. Dog bites man is not news. Man bites dog is news. You've heard this before. If you haven't heard it from me, you've heard it from one of us, or you've heard it from someone. How many times does a man have to bite a dog before it ceases to be big news? I ask because this is, today, the 5th day in the last 4 years upon which a new Prime Minister is going to be installed. And it is still a momentous occasion. But it gets a little bit less momentous, doesn't it, with repetition? Or does it? And that's why today the question I'm asking you is, why? And indeed how have we become a country in which this momentous thing can happen pretty much every moment? Now, I say Brexit, you say Femi. Femi, Brexit. Brexit, Femi. I haven't spoken to him in ages. Femi Olawole, who you will remember is a tireless chronicler of the madness of Brexit. So I suspect I know what at least the beginning of your answer, Femi, in Birmingham, will be to the question, why is our country in such a ridiculous state of constant flux?
Yeah, so the reason why Brexit is at the heart of it, along with the voting system, is because Brexit was the thing that made it okay for politicians to explicitly and overtly say, I'm going to hurt you. In 2018, it was leaked from government documents that no matter what version of Brexit they negotiated, it was going to make people poor, which means that every politician from that point on who supported Brexit was saying, I'm deliberately going to make you poor. And we've seen that continue right now with the Reform Party saying, yes, Brexit has hurt you. We intend to make it worse. I've interviewed Reform Party candidates who have said explicitly, yes, we want to go for no-deal Brexit still. Yes, that would damage our food supply for the next 20 years. But sometimes... Sorry?
But the people that they are appealing to don't believe that it's going to make their lives worse. They still believe that it's going to make their lives better. So it's a little... I know I've interrupted you, so possibly you were moving to address this anyway, but it's surely a bit subtler than you allow.
Well, I know you weren't a fan of opinion polls earlier in this conversation, but opinion polling shows that by a ratio of 45-9, Brexit voters themselves believe that Brexit has made them poor.
But they didn't think it was going to, and most of them would argue that that's because it hasn't been done properly. There is a brilliant Brexit, but it goes to a different school.
So, yes, originally they thought that, but that's the reason why we've now seen a massive shift in terms of people, generally speaking, believing that Brexit was a mistake, because even those Brexit voters who originally believed that it would make them better off have now changed tune. But ultimately, my point is more about the politicians themselves. Yes. If you are getting into power with the position of, I'm going to make people poor, and Nigel Farage literally said in 2018...
Careful, just keep everything national, won't you? I know you will, Femi. You know what you're doing.
Sorry, yes. Certain politicians have said in the past, do you know what I'm asked about, we're going to rich or poor with Brexit? You know what my answer is? What price freedom? What price liberty? What price our identity as a country? These are the arguments actually that really matter. So that kind of attitude of it's okay to make people poor, you can't run a government like that. And because of what we've seen since then, Brexit as a concept has also damaged the actual mentality of the politicians. For example, Boris Johnson, his entire Brexit rhetoric was based on the idea of it's okay to ignore experts, it's okay to prioritize liberty, sovereignty in the name of personal freedom, and we shouldn't be doing what other countries shouldn't be following the example of other countries. So I'm
missing a nodal connector. I think your analysis of Brexit is faultless, as always. You can enjoy more of Femi in all the usual places, as YouTube. I call them tutorials, mate. I don't know if that's the correct word, but I found them invaluable over the years. I agree entirely with your analysis of Brexit, and I agree almost entirely with your apportioning of blame. But I don't yet see why that creates the atmosphere of flux, the atmosphere of constant change. How, for example, do the consequences of Brexit account for the brevity of Keir Starmer's premiership?
So with him, that is because he supported a Brexit that the majority of his voters opposed. So he lost incredible amounts of support from his own side. Like even with Boris Johnson, he was more popular because at least he had the support of the right at the beginning. Whereas Keir Starmer came to power promising to be a party of the centre ground, was how he put it, which it immediately alienated the left, and obviously he wasn't going to appeal to the right enough, and even though he tried, so he never had any real support. It was just an anti-Tory vote, which immediately vanished as soon as the Tories were gone. That is where the voting system comes into it, because we have politicians who have to try and appeal to as many people as possible. They can't really be truly authentically of the left or authentically of the right. They have to try and get mainstream appeal in order to win in this two-party system, this first past the post. So
the impossibility of Brexit being anything other than bad, and you can have gradations of badness. You can call it a disaster or you can call it suboptimal, but no one can really portray it as a positive and sleep straight in their beds at night. Creates a legacy in which it's impossible to do normal politics.
Yeah, well, I mean, your average voter will genuinely believe in their heart of hearts that they are ticking that box in that voting booth for the purpose of making their lives better.
Yes.
But if you have politicians who come into power explicitly saying, "I'm going to make you poor," and all,
they never explicitly say that, Femi, but it's actually implicit.
Yeah, I mean, if you,
I understand your point, but no one is going to get elected saying, "I promise to make you poorer." They know they're going to make people poorer, but they're still promising to make them richer.
Yes, but if you have Keir Starmer saying that Brexit is damaging the economy, as they've been saying forever, and then saying, but I will still keep supporting Brexit, then the implication of that is, I plan to make you poor.
Yeah, and it breaks something, a social contract, trust, and regardless of how many people listening to this still reject the idea that Brexit was an unmitigated disaster, you've been broken as well, because you didn't get any of the things that you were promised by the people that told you it would be a good thing. I've got Natasha waiting for me, so do this one very briefly. It doesn't exactly augur well for Andy Burnham then, does it, given that none of the things that you describe are likely to change or disappear just because we've got yet another body in Downing Street?
Well, that's the painful thing about it, because he has in the past said that we need to rejoin the EU. He said we need a new voting system, but then he said that we shouldn't be rejoining the EU within his lifetime. And the problem with that is his argument for that was, well, it's up to the EU to decide whether or not we can rejoin. But I literally just got back from Brussels, where I spoke to the officials of Brussels, for example, Sandro Gozzi, the head of Brexit in the European Parliament, who explicitly said not only is it time for the UK to come back, but it's also time to make people responsible for that, like Nigel Farage, pay for the damage that they've done. So yes, there is no massive block on the EU side. It is the UK's choice whether or not we start to undo the poverty that Brexit has caused. And unfortunately, too many politicians are telling you, no, we'd like to keep making you poor.
I like it. Well, I don't like it. I like your analysis because it's insightful and helpful, but I don't like the picture that you paint, albeit that I think it's probably accurate. But as with all calls to this programme, you're welcome to pick holes in what Femi in Birmingham has told us, or as you've heard, Femi Olawole, the tireless, anti-Brexit sounds like such a ridiculous label now, doesn't it? Should we just say the tireless pro-reality and pro-evidence campaigner? Of course, the prospect of Nigel Farage paying for anything is... well, shall we say unlikely? And even if he did, he'd probably get the money off Christopher Harborne anyway. It's 10:42. Natasha Clark is live at Downing Street to say things that she's already said on at least 3 occasions, but in a slightly different order. Natasha, good morning.
Good morning, James. I've actually spent the last hour or so thinking of some new things and speaking to some new people. So thank you. The very latest from Number 10. I would never want to repeat boring old content I've already told the nation before, because obviously they've all been listening all morning, so they know it all already.
And watching, Natasha, and watching.
You have just been tuning in, of course, and watching. But just to recap, in case you have not been listening all morning, as I'm sure everybody here on LBC has, we're expecting to hear from the outgoing Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, just after 11 o'clock. Then he's going to be making his way to Buckingham Palace to formally tender his resignation to the King. At around the same time, we expect Andy Burnham to then make his way to Buckingham Palace, where he will be invited to form a new government. And here in Downing Street is where we will expect to see him at the podium just before 1 o'clock this afternoon. So it's all happening in your show, James. As always, you get the best Prime Minister transition time, because it's all happening within your show. And then the temperature's really heating up here in Downing Street. A gaggle of Keir Starmer supporters is standing, you can't see just out of shot, but by the gates to Downing Street. They are assembling ready to say goodbye to the Prime Minister. They will be standing in the street as he makes his sort of exit speech and then travels down to Buckingham Palace. I can see a newborn baby as well in the just in the corner of my eye as well. Not quite sure whose that is, but people, guests old and new, are here to see the old Prime Minister out and to
says
welcome
it gets
the
kissed
new
later.
Prime Minister in. I'm sure it does get kissed later. I'm sure that's exactly why this baby is in Downing Street later. But yes, the England flags have been unfortunately taken down since last time I was here in Downing Street, which is a little bit sad. It does just change the decor a little bit. But yes, we will expect to see the outgoing Prime Minister in just around an hour or so's time. I can see his key aides just behind me planning out exactly where he's going to stand. All of the, obviously, wires getting connected up. The podium will be rolled out shortly where he will be speaking to the nation. And obviously a very sad day for many of those number 10 staff. Some of them I've been speaking to this morning are going to be staying on to see Keir Starmer's transition of power into Andy Burnham, which is going to be very odd for them. The man they've been working for the last 2 years is essentially going to be morphing into a new person basically overnight. So it'll be a strange experience for some of those people in Downing Street. And then of course later this afternoon, James, we will see the all-important cabinet be appointed, and expecting big jobs for people like Shabana Mahmood, who is being tipped to become the new Chancellor. She's currently, of course, Home Secretary. And also in the last few hours, I'm told, Angela Rayner, a big job expected for the former Deputy Prime Minister, expected to make a return to Cabinet. No one's quite exactly sure which job she is going to be getting yet, but I'm told that housing might be something that she will return back to. Of course, she was the Housing Secretary before she had to resign from Keir Starmer's government last year. So it's all happening here in Downing Street, James.
Thank you. Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, on the ground in Downing Street, and making a monkey out of me by absolutely sharing some new information, as she will continue to do throughout the day. And of course, Sheila will be in the chair, and possibly Tom by the time those, and Tom as well by the time those announcements begin to be made. She did remind me, though, with the mention of the flags, that there's a parallel timeline, isn't there, where Andy Burnham would have been arriving in Downing Street today with a nation still high upon the fumes of winning the World Cup. I mean, it was far from impossible, closer, in fact, to happening than pretty much at any point in the last 60 years. Well, never, actually, would you have had the arrival of a new Prime Minister so fast upon a massive sporting success. So it's the mighty morphing Labour leaders, to paraphrase Natasha Clark. More on this today. Andrew Marr joining me at about 11 o'clock. He, of course, has counted them in and counted them out like almost no other. Keir Starmer set to speak for about 5 minutes, we think, at 11:15 before heading off to Buckingham Palace, where he will meet the King. And Andy Burnham will arrive there shortly afterwards before returning to Downing Street and delivering a speech. I've heard a whisper that Andy Burnham is going to, one of my favourite words, incoming, he's going to eschew the lectern. Quite how you deliver a speech, you'd have to have a mic on his lapel, would he, or something like that? Or I may have been hideously misinformed, but we will see. And then the cabinet appointments will begin at approximate, just as I clock off, really, with the senior roles generally all in place by late afternoon. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The question that we are wrestling with these punctuation marks of moment, if you like, is very simple. How have we ended up being a country, becoming a country, living in a country where 5 prime ministers in 4 years feels almost normal? The list so far: flux addiction, constant opinion polling. I think they're cousins, aren't they? A bent media, of course, Brexit, inevitably, as brilliantly explained a moment ago by Femi, and an addiction to quick fixes. So they're all, so far, variations on a similar theme, but they merit, I think, individual status as well. Flux addiction, constant opinion polling. Not all opinion polls. I didn't mean to suggest, for example, that tracking views of whether Brexit was a disaster or whether we should spend more money on defence, they're good. I just mean having opinion polls about the next general election up to 5 years before the next general election is going to happen. It's pointless. Flux addiction, constant polling, bent media, Brexit, quick fixes. What would you like to add to that list, or indeed take off it? It's 10:48.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10:51 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Let's rattle through some text before we get back to the phones. Why are we looking at the 5th PM in 4 years? Because people have the attention span of a gnat, suggests Sue in Ramsgate. And she might be onto something there. Ian suggests that it's because of Amazon's next day delivery that people's patience has been completely diminished. Listen, these are all going to be brushstrokes upon the portrait that we paint together, but how many, or indeed how significant these suggestions are, is up for debate. You're missing one out, James. Much as I love your programme and listen every day, writes another James, 24-hour news and phone-ins when there is actually nothing to talk about sound a death knell for calm, sensible politics. Yeah, OK. I mean, 24-hour news is a relatively new arrival. Radio phone-ins aren't. LBC's been around since about 1973, so I don't think you can pin that one on us. But yeah, that idea of possibly that flux addiction being somehow linked to the idea that the news is so breathless. Who's going to be? In fact, we could open a book now. Who will be the first columnist or pundit or commentator to predict that Andy Burnham's days are numbered? Somebody will. Channel 4, writes Steve, have done a really good piece on this, suggesting that an era of multiple PMs does have a precedent over the last 200 years, but you'd have to go back 100 years for the last one, to the 1920s. So a political and economic shock. So in the 20s, it was the legacy of World War I. Today, it is, of course, Brexit, which is why so many people are mentioning it. Point 2, a weakening of the two-party system. In the 20s, you had Labour replacing the old Liberals. Now you've got Reform, Plaid Cymru and the Greens on the march. And number 3, new media. In the 1920s, it was radio and nationally circulated newspapers. For us, in this era, it's social media. The times are obviously very different, but these similarities are worth noting, aren't they? Time suggests that we will actually return to stability at some point, and I think Steve speaks for almost all of us when he says, hopefully soon. And one more from Ian in Callington. James, this all began with Johnson. His unashamed misbehaviour, giving permission to the easily led masses that it's OK, even cool, to misbehave. And one of those misbehaviours is, of course, intolerance, hence the position that we are in right now with the frequent changing of prime ministers. The King, I can tell you, has arrived at Buckingham Palace, where he doesn't currently live. I've actually broken the habit of a lifetime. I've done a little bit of homework, so that, albeit that I intend to still tickle you and amuse you with my irreverent coverage of these matters, I don't want that to overcloud or overshadow the important bits. So the King has arrived at Buckingham Palace, where he doesn't currently live and where he is not intending to live. When the current refurbishment is complete, he will remain at Clarence House. And I can see why, actually. Something that I've hinted at in recent weeks but haven't actually told you explicitly is that I had the great privilege of visiting Buckingham Palace just a few weeks ago. I didn't see the King. I wasn't visiting him. But it is a curious place. I wouldn't go so far as to describe it as soulless, but I have no trouble whatsoever understanding why the King and the Queen, who I think deserve their home comforts, not least because of the illness that the King continues to battle, have elected not to actually live there, and to make that official rather than just to not spend a great deal of time there as his predecessor and mother, the Queen, did. I've also got some extraordinary information for you, which I think is new. I mean, you may have heard it before, but if you've heard it before, you have to be a bit of an anorak on exactly what the decor in the rooms that Andy Burnham will walk through on his way to meet the King looks like, and why it looks like what it looks like. So all of that to come. Keir Starmer supporters arriving at Downing Street in anticipation of a speech in approximately 20 minutes' time. One would hope for a fairly good-natured exchange. But only time will tell. Michelle is in Skipton in North Yorkshire. Michelle, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Michelle.
Yeah, I listened to what Femi had to say, and I think what I'm going to say is probably related to that as well, but also the text that you've just read out from Steve about going back 100 years. I think there's also a connection there. So I think the Brexit result was because people were really starting to feel that times were getting harder, and they were looking for change, and they were given lots of reasons why leaving Europe would make things less difficult, would have more money floating in the system. So that's what started it, I think. And then I think since then, because people have not felt better off. In fact, many people are feeling more and more hard up. They're still looking for that change.
I think this is
that
brilliant.
They voted for as part of Brexit. So every time there's been a vote, let's look at when the Conservatives were booted out, sort of quite, shockingly. It was a big change, and Keir Starmer came in on that change. Immediately, almost, they decided Keir Starmer was despicable because he promised change, but they're not feeling anything. Part of it is to do with that, somebody else's mention of the Amazon next day delivery, that kind of feeling that many people...
I want it all and I want it now.
Yeah. Not got the patience to wait, may understand that something that's taken so long to get to that state will actually take a long time to reverse and to make us feel better, but can't really wait around for it because things are just getting so hard, they're getting so desperate, and then we get reform coming in, doing all the promises. I think that's what's triggered what's triggered the leadership change in Labour, isn't it? Because they can see what's happening and they know that they've got to make a quick change before... This is
really smart. So change has become an end in itself as a consequence of Brexit, and it's going to be largely subconscious, as opposed to a means to an end. So why are we changing? Well, because that is how we achieve X, Y, and Z. Why versus the new model, which is why are we changing? Oh, because we've run out of patience with the last lot. So we're going to change. And Starmer actually is a victim of that, even as most Labour activists and indeed Labour MPs who've speeded Keir Starmer's exit from Downing Street might dispute it or would object to seeing themselves put in the same category as Brexiters. Starmer is a victim of that. We need a change without really digging that deeply into why we need a change or what that change would look like.
Well, the change needs to be quite a radical change that upends a lot of the way things are working at the moment, so that the ordinary person in some of these very deprived areas that lost their industries and stuff, they are the people that really need to start feeling like life has turned a corner for them.
And even if that's too much to ask in the short term, they need to feel seen and heard in ways that perhaps they haven't before. Yeah. But that casting of change as an end in itself rather than a means to an end, that knits together, as you suggested you were going to, it knits together an awful lot of the other themes that have come up. And at risk of sounding patronising to people, not to you, the grown-ups should be better than that. The grown-ups should be saying, no, you wait till your father gets home, or saying, no, you can't have that. You'll have to wait and see what Father Christmas brings. Do you see what I mean? It's this idea that we grew up knowing that patience is a virtue, whereas today people, partly because of Brexit, partly because of life itself, have been persuaded that they can have everything yesterday and that change will somehow equal improvement. But of course, if Brexit taught us anything, it was that change doesn't necessarily turn out to be for the better. That's brilliant, Michelle. Thank you. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I have a view of Natasha's view at the moment. She's on a sort of scaffolded eyrie overlooking Downing Street, where the massed ranks of the world's media, and of course most prominently this country's media, are gathered, awaiting for the fifth time in 4 years, the departure of a UK Prime Minister. And we will be taking that live. But first, your news headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
And nobody's mentioned social media. We probably will turn our attention to that at some point in the coming couple of hours. It's 3 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we are for the fifth time in 4 years, marking a changing of personnel at number 10 Downing Street. Andrew Marr, who I hope won't be embarrassed by my first question. How many of these have you done now?
Goes right back to the end of Margaret Thatcher. You'll have to count them off on your fingers then. I think my first big political crisis as a reporter was Michael Heseltine storming out of Downing Street after rowing with Margaret Thatcher about the Westland crisis in, I think, 1984.
Gosh, yeah, that's my A-level politics project. Why do you think? I mean, the question I've been asking callers this morning is how do you account for this addiction to flux that seems to typify UK politics at the moment?
Good question. I think we are a declining economy, struggling economy, in a part of the world, the so-called West, which is, apart from America, in real trouble, hemmed in by the rise of the industrial powers in the East. That means that ordinary people find life gets harder and harder and harder, and their kids have less prospects than they did, and they look around for somebody to blame, and we all flail around. We think it's their fault or it's that fault, and we bring in people with simple ideas. I don't know if you've ever mentioned Brexit on the show. But,
no, never. What is it?
People come in with an eye and say, sort this out and everything will be all right. It's all migration, it's all this, it's all that. And each Prime Minister doesn't make the same mistakes as the predecessor did, but makes new mistakes, all of their own, and so it goes on.
What do you know about Andy Burnham? You must have encountered him quite a lot over the years, Andrew.
I think he's somebody who's been on a long personal journey. I interviewed him years ago for LBC about, this idea that he'd sort of flipped and flopped and changed his mind a bit and been a slightly different character when he was down as a minister before. And he said something very interesting. He said, all my life, when I came down south from Manchester as a student and from then on, I suffered from imposter syndrome. Didn't really know who I was, why I was, what my purpose was. And I struggled. And it was only when I came back and confronted the Hillsborough problem, the Hillsborough disaster at the COP on that famous afternoon, that I suddenly remembered, oh, yes, I'm that guy from Manchester. This is who I am. And therefore, the years as Manchester mayor, I think, have given him a sense of self that he hadn't had before and that we as a country are going to need very badly now.
Yes, you did the first interview with him, of course, after he won that Makerfield by-election. And I'm interested to hear you say that because, you've interviewed an awful lot of politicians over the years, and an awful lot of them would have been pouring untruths into your ears or displaying inauthenticity. You really buy this idea that Andy Burnham, because he said it to me as well, and for the record, I also believed him, that he has been on the kind of journey that should diffuse or remove references back to him losing against Jeremy Corbyn or losing against Ed Miliband, because he is now both a different man and a different politician.
Neither of us can know what's going on
of course
really behind his face and inside his private mind. I just see somebody who at the very, very least has the optimism, the gusto, the oomph, the relish, whatever you call it, to hold power. And I think we're just waiting for Keir Starmer to come out. And Keir had many, many qualities, but he did not relish power. He did not enjoy the job. It's the hardest job in the country. It's a really miserably hard job in many ways, and at least you have to have a relish for it. And I think we're about to see a Prime Minister who does.
Indeed, as Andrew mentions, we have got one eye on each other and the other eye on Downing Street, where there is quite a gathering now of Keir Starmer's staff outside Downing Street on one side of that famous thoroughfare. That's the sort of phrase you use, right, when you're doing things like this? Famous thoroughfare, Andrew. That's the language that you'd never deploy in normal life at moments like this.
Except, of course, it's
not a thoroughfare. Yeah, but no one likes a pedant. It was once. It was a thoroughfare.
It was a long time ago.
Okay,
I can
let me
remember
try again.
In and out of it,
the famous former thoroughfare. On one side you have Keir Starmer's staff, and on the other side a mixture of media and supporters. The lectern is in place, no podium for fans of pedantry. It is just the lectern, and Starmer set to speak, we think, in the next 7 or 8 minutes.
He's not going to be doused as poor Rishi Sunak was on that famous occasion.
He didn't bring an umbrella with him.
If he leaves it much longer, that some of his staff will keel over with sunstroke.
One of those cameras is firing off continuously.
You mentioned he hasn't enjoyed the job. Did that surprise you? Because you'd find out fairly quickly, wouldn't he? And his rise was surprisingly quick and easy, actually, for a man who ended up Prime Minister.
And there are lots of bits of the job he did well and did enjoy. He was actually quite a good speaker at party conference.
Yeah.
He did that. He got on very well on the world stage and clearly enjoyed that aspect of it. But I think he had two real problems which became fatal. He wasn't really interested in politics, was one. He didn't like the whole game of politics. And you can be high-minded about it and say it's all a bit shabby, but it's absolutely essential. These people are tradesmen, they're craftsmen. There is a craft of politics which he disdained. And a big part of that, second, was just listening to people. People around him would tell him things and he would ignore them and listen and very often move them aside and bring in somebody else. And, you cannot run a successful team like that.
And that, of course, led to a surfeit of delegation.
Absolutely. Delegation, but at the same time, without a very clear sense of what the boss wanted. He used to say in the Tony Blair years, Angie Hunter or Powell, or whoever it was, would come in and say, Tony wants this, Tony wants that. And everybody knew that came from the top. There was a sort of direction. Nobody said Keir wants and was really heard.
How do we think Andy Burnham will deal with the abuse that he is now likely to face? Not just, of course, from traditional media, where we've plied our trade for a while, but also this new environment of social media where anything goes. Here is
an unexpected thought. I think there is a comparison to be made between Andy Burnham and Donald Trump. And I mean by that they both understand that this new world of social media, so-called social, anti-social media, is the world in which we all live. And Trump understands that you have to sort of dominate and grab people's attention all day, every day. And he does it by extraordinarily vituperative or funny or just abusive messages on Truth Social the whole time. And the entire world sort of snaps around and watches him. Now, Andy Burnham is in a different position, but those little films that he's putting out every single day on X and on the other social media platforms, I think very professionally done, very entertaining, quite affecting sometimes, about his musical taste and what he thinks about football and VAR and what he thinks about clothes and what he thinks about Kemi Badenoch and blah, blah, blah. That is a new way of getting into our heads. Quite interesting. It's doubly interesting because it insulates him from the Starmer criticism of not really knowing who he is or what he stands for. He's coming out of the blocks at full speed saying, this is me. Here is who I am. I mean, he will want, within a few weeks or months, everybody in the country to have a clear idea, when you say the words Andy Burnham, what you're talking about. What do we think Keir Starmer will do next? Very interesting. I was talking to Jenny Chapman, the Foreign Office Baroness, who knows him very well, and she gave me a broad hint that he'd do something on the international stage, she thought. And I wonder whether the NATO job will come up, something like that. I don't know. He's well thought of in those. There's a rumour, as you know, that he might, although he said he'll stay as an MP, he might actually give up St Holborn and St Pancras and allow David Miliband to come back into the Commons. Yes. Well, as I said, the addiction to flux is unlikely to alleviate anytime soon, albeit that I think everybody really, almost for patriotic reasons, Andrew, would quite like to see a decent tenure in Downing Street. Give the guy a chance. Yes. At the back of my head, inappropriately, because they were not a pro-Labour band, I've got Chumbawamba. We fall down, we get back up again. That's the message. We have to get back up again. But let's not have a whiskey drink or indeed a lager drink just yet. It's 12 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Andrew Marr is in the studio with me. Natasha Clark remains at Downing Street, where the crowds are considerable. But that's pretty much par for the course, Natasha. This is. I mean, I mentioned at the very top of the show that we could only retain so many memories in our human minds, but for people who can't remember or don't have a frame of reference, this is pretty much how it always goes now.
Yes, that's right, James, and my apologies for using the podium. It's obviously a lectern. You can see it's a lectern, but for some reason in our collective minds, it's seen as the podium moment when it comes out and is rolled out of number 10 Downing Street. But yes, this is exactly what happens when there is a transition from one Prime Minister to another. Sometimes we don't always hear from the outgoing leader, but usually we do. Usually we get a couple of minutes speech, and I'm told that this speech from Sir Keir Starmer that we'll be getting in the next few minutes is going to be quite short. It will essentially just be a repetition of the speeches that he's already delivered twice now, once in Prime Minister's Questions last week, as we were discussing, and of course before, when he actually came out to the lectern a few weeks ago, announcing that he was going to resign. And he is surrounded at the moment, and you can see them behind me. All of Keir Starmer's top team is there, and including some very significant members of the cabinet that have been by his side since day one, since he was elected into government back in 2024. I can see Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, David Lammy as well, the Deputy Prime Minister, and a number of Keir Starmer's top team all gathering to essentially say their farewell moments. And there will be questions for many of those cabinet ministers today about their political futures. I've been hearing a lot about Rachel Reeves in the last few days. There is a suggestion that she may stay on with a job in some form, but we're not quite sure exactly what that would look like. Again, David Lammy is somebody that I have heard may be kept on in Andy Burnham's top team. But James, as we've been discussing for a while now, we know that Andy Burnham has got a lot of people in his top team to please. We're not expecting to see him lay out this cabinet until mid-afternoon. Big jobs, as I was discussing with you earlier, for people like Angela Rayner, Lisa Nandy, Ed Miliband, Shabana Mahmood, but we don't know exactly what that top team is going to look like until Andy Burnham does make up his cabinet later today. I think we are just about to see Keir Starmer and his wife Victoria now making their way out.
Sir Keir Starmer addressing the nation for the final time as Prime Minister.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, and good morning. I'm about to visit His Majesty the King to offer my resignation and close the book on my time as Prime Minister. My work is done. In 6.5 years, I took our party from a historic defeat in 2019, changed it so it was fit to face the country, and won a landslide general election victory in 2024. Since then, it has been the privilege of my life to serve you and this great country as Prime Minister. And I am confident that Britain is now stronger and fairer than it was 2 years ago. Our economy is stronger. Our public services are on the up, with the biggest fall in waiting times for 17 years. Children are being lifted out of poverty every single day. Immigration is down significantly. Our defence and security are on a far stronger footing, and our international reputation is greatly enhanced. Yet the thing I will always take away with me, the most humbling aspect of this job, is the front row seat you get to witness the greatest things of this country in action. To see every day immeasurable acts of resolve, grit, decency and compassion from people who serve our country, whether that's in their regimental colours, NHS scrubs, or simply the millions of people in their communities who volunteer their time and their effort to the ground beneath their feet. We face a world now where our enemies will stop at nothing to divide us because of our values, our freedom, our decency, and frankly, because of our unflinching resolve towards the brave people of Ukraine. And so under this attack, it is vital that we remember the greatness of the Britain all around us, that while we debate how to fix our problems, there is something we inherit from our country and our character that can give us confidence, that we can change our country for the better, that we can create a Britain where every child can go as far as their talent will take them, and we can unite different people under our common flag if we don't succumb to that division. So as I now pass the baton to Andy Burnham, I wish him every success. He has my full support. And finally, I want to thank once again my family, Vic and our children, my team, all the staff here and across the Labour Party, everyone at Number 10 and across the civil service, and everyone who has supported our efforts along the way. For all the focus on individuals, politics will always be a team sport, and the changes we've delivered for our country and our party belong to everyone who has fought for them. I thank them again today, and I thank the British people for the opportunity to serve. I go with good grace, I go with a smile, and I go proud of everything that we have achieved. Thank you very much.
Sir Keir Starmer there bidding farewell to both the office of Prime Minister and the country he has led for 2 years. Almost exactly as Natasha predicted, a reprise of the speeches that he has given at PMQs and elsewhere. And Andrew Marr still in the studio with me. A palpable sense, correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, of relief. I mean, these are moments that are often...
Did he not genuinely quite happy to be off, I have to say. And he did something, I'll give him credit for this, which very few politicians do. He realised we don't want to listen to them forever. He was quite terse, quite quick.
And now Sir Keir Starmer and his wife Victoria walk hand in hand down the former thoroughfare of Downing Street, all once again, and prepared to get into the car that will take them to Buckingham Palace. But once again, and almost, I've used the word relief already, there's almost a celebratory air.
I have thought ever since he realised he was losing office, right at the, that extraordinarily disciplined, fast Burnham coup, which we were told the Labour Party could never achieve, but did. I think the relief has been clearer and clearer. He's been enjoying himself in the House of Commons exchanges with Kemi Badenoch, and that last, I remember I was listening to you and Natasha talk about it.
It was charming, wasn't it?
And it was charming.
Yes.
He's enjoying, he, as I say, I don't think he ever really liked the job or enjoyed it.
Much to his own surprise, I imagine. You spend all your life focusing on getting it, that you never really stop to think whether you'll want it when you get it.
It actually is.
Which is not a fate that's likely to befall Andy Burnham, who pretty much knows exactly what he's letting himself in for, I think.
Yeah, and we can see in Downing Street almost all the people that we expect to leave government quickly. There's Lord Hermer, Rachel Reeves, David Lammy, all there, all likely to lose prominent cabinet positions.
What's the dynamic usually on I mean, will they be offered demotions or will they be shown the door?
I think probably in most cases, Rachel Reeves is perhaps a different case, but in most of the cases of people going, it'll be short, it'll be apologetic, I'm terribly sorry, I need that seat, I need to make room for you. It won't be like the famous Attlee moment where a junior minister came in and said, I'm terribly sorry, I'm dismissing you from your job. The guy said, but I've done this. Why are you doing that? Why are you doing... Attlee takes his pipe out of his mouth, looks up and said, not up to it, I'm afraid. I think it'll be like that.
A different era. Speaking of which, when you were on duty where Natasha is now, did you ever yourself or indeed witness anybody else get a substantive answer to the questions that you bellow as the comers and goers? No, never. But it's all part of the pantomime.
Back in the old days, there's a wonderful BBC guy known, I'm afraid, as Gobby.
Yes, of course.
Who would bellow these questions, increasingly rude, just trying to get them to smile or turn or something. But it was mostly fruitless.
He was a field producer, wasn't he? He wasn't actually... Yeah, so he was just trying to get shots. He was trying to get the camera, tee something up for the camera.
He was a master at lobbing the kind of just slightly offensive but interesting question at the right moment.
Sir Keir Starmer, as I say, now making the relatively short cart journey to Buckingham Palace, where he will meet the King. Natasha Clark is still at Downing Street, waiting, of course, for the next chapter in this unfolding saga, which will be Andy Burnham's arrival there and his speech of welcome. I'm thinking of all the tears. I'm not to labour the point, Andrew, but I am really struck by what you've just perfectly encapsulated, the sense that Keir Starmer is as happy as anybody else that he's quitting there, except possibly Andy Burnham.
Yeah, I mean, he was very angry before it happened.
Yes.
And he fought very hard, and his team fought very, very hard for him. But once he realised it was inevitable, and it was, I think it was the numbers in Makerfield that made it inevitable. Yeah. We all thought, well, if he's just going, maybe Andy Burnham will be defeated by reform in Makerfield, or maybe he'll win, but only just, and it won't be convincing, it won't. But the size of his victory meant there was just unstoppable momentum.
And as you say, a sort of period of relative grace now for Burnham to get his house in order and to assemble his team. What are his top priorities? What are the biggest things you think he needs to do?
Well, first of all, it's going to be a very, very busy afternoon. Lots and lots of jobs to be announced. And by this evening, we'll know much more about the shape of his government, and he's determined. He wants to reshape the whole centre of British government, a new Prime Minister's department, not just Number 10 North, but really to get a grip on the Treasury from the Number 10 point of view, lots and lots of that. In terms of policy priorities, I think there's two different things. He wants to put more money in people's pockets, which means cheaper bus fares perhaps. It might mean cuts on energy bills, whatever it means, so that people notice that he's there short term. You have to arrive and be noticed. You'll be judged very, very quickly. And then he has to sort of settle about the big long-term problems, the ballooning welfare bill, what he's going to have to say about, I think, the triple lock for a start, but also about PIPs. That'll be difficult. Where's he going to find the money for defence? That'll be difficult, and so on and so on.
Yeah, and the wheels will move very, very, very quickly on the coverage of that, and indeed the coverage of the apparent failure to do so. The car now arriving at Buckingham Palace, where Sir Keir Starmer prepares to meet the King, to hand over his resignation. King Charles, I suppose, has had a little bit more in the first couple of years of his reign than, or 5 years of his reign, than most monarchs would expect to have, as we've touched on earlier, going back to the 1920s to look for a sort of comparable era of change and flux. The palace is currently undergoing a period of refurbishment, so while the cameras won't be accompanying Sir Keir and Victoria Starmer, I don't know whether or not they will be actually ushered through some of the areas that look a little bit like a building site at the moment. And one of the interesting things about Buckingham Palace is that away from the staterooms, as soon as it's a bit like a department store. I'm not sure this is a parallel that's ever been drawn before.
I was going to say like an elderly railway hotel from the 1930s.
That's the bits you can see, but when you go through the doors that are not the staterooms, it's like a sort of 1970s prep school or a department store where the customers never go. You know, the stairwells are sort of lino and tatty fixtures and fittings and tatty furnishings. They're doing that now. And the main hall that they will enter into, which is the hall off which both the King's office or the office that the King currently uses, and the room where the balcony is, the famous balcony, that hallway is replete with what I believe the technical term is chinoiserie. This is my nugget of information, Andrew Marr, that I've been saving up all day and indeed all weekend.
It was worth waiting for.
I haven't finished because it's slightly incongruous. You wouldn't necessarily expect at the seat of the British monarch to find yourself moving through a corridor where the decor and the fixtures and fittings and the decorations are all of a distinctly oriental mien. Do you know why that is?
I think you're going to tell us.
Yes, but do you know why that is?
No, I don't. I assume this is stuff that when we were out there, here's some stuff they said.
No, this is entirely self-generated. This is entirely a discovery of my own making. I doubt very much that it's never been put in the public sphere before. But when Queen Victoria sold the Royal Pavilion to Brighton City Council, yes, so we're going back a while, it is rumoured that Brighton Council thought that they were getting the property as seen.
Oh, she ripped it all out.
Yes, so they thought they were getting all of the internal decorations.
And it is slightly disappointing inside.
Yes, the pavilion is now, because it's very much not as it was envisioned or indeed as it was originally delivered. Yeah. So, you know, the Pickford's trucks were whatever the 19th century equivalent of the Pickford's trucks would have been. They were all parked outside. Queen Victoria had issued very, very strict instructions to get everything, clear the place out. I don't want to hand over anything that they haven't paid for. She'd done her due diligence. She'd read the terms and conditions. Brighton Council possibly hadn't. And an awful lot of that, and I hope I'm using the word correctly, an awful lot of that chinoiserie is
back place
in that particular corridor, in that particular hallway. And if the BBC have got any nuggets of insight like that today, then I'll give you the money myself. And of course, as Starmer arrives at Buckingham Palace, all of this will unfold away from the cameras and away from the prying eyes of the world's media and the country's media. Standing by for the next stage in this story, which will involve Andy Burnham making his way to Buckingham Palace and then returning to Downing Street to deliver his speech. Is there any truth in this rumour that that he's going to eschew the lectern? Have you heard this?
I have heard it.
Did I hear it from you originally?
I don't think so. But I've also heard it, and it would be interesting. I mean, actually, vibes matter, style matters. Yeah. And if he's going to stand there more informally dressed without a lectern, it'll just look and feel a bit different, which is what he wants.
And if we are a nation addicted to change, and the first hour of the programme today sort of worked on the presumption that that was a bad thing, but if Andy Burnham comes in absolutely committed to very real, deep and lasting change, covering everything from the way he governs and the way he looks when he governs, then Well, I know you're an eternal optimist. I'm a little bit too given to hope as well, as opposed to despair. But it is perhaps time for a short period of...
We should reflect on the fact that almost all of our colleagues, not almost all, but a huge number of our colleagues have written him off as a total dud and a failure before he's even got his feet underneath the desk. I think, the country is angry, has been angry for some time, and is desperate for real change. Reform offer one kind of really big change, and I think for the first time, Andy Burnham sounds like he's offering a rival kind of change.
I like that. Fingers crossed. It is coming up to 11:30. Andrew, you're now off to Downing Street.
I'm off to Downing Street.
To count another one in.
Yep, absolutely.
To count another one in. Let's hope it's a while before you're doing it again.
My boy reporter's notebook in my hand.
Model 2 us all. The time is approaching 11:30. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC on this portentous day. Even if they are coming along rather more regularly than they used to, they remain significant and portentous and remain with us, both on the radio and, of course, in vision on YouTube, Global Player and the LBC app, as we continue, for once, not to paint pictures on the radio using our vocabularies and imaginations, but in fact to accompany the words that I share with you with glorious Technicolor. It's 11:30 and Dominic Ellis has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
5 minutes to 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we can't obviously follow the events within the walls of Buckingham Palace, but technically at some point in the next few minutes, if it hasn't already happened, the King will accept Keir Starmer's resignation and await Andy Burnham's arrival, where he will bestow his permission to these are ceremonial and constitutional moments, of course, and Andy Burnham will announce his intention to form a government and receive the royal blessing. I don't actually know. This is when you need to have a kind of historian in the studio with you. What happens in the interregnum, as it were, in the event of something desperately important happening, in those minutes between the resignation being accepted and the new person being installed, what would actually happen if anyway, hopefully we won't find out today. 25 to 12 is the time. The question we've been wrestling with before we were interrupted by events was, of course, the why of it, as ever on this programme. Why are we in a place where changing the Prime Minister has become commonplace? It's no exaggeration to say so. 5 people in 4 years is extraordinary, and anything extraordinary merits examination. And here are some of the answers we've got already. I opened with an addiction to flux, and that might be a journalistic perspective, actually, because as I've been saying pretty much every day since 2016, it's very good for business, not so good for the soul. Lots to report, lots of speculation, lots of runners and riders. But of course, it didn't used to be like that when it was as rare as hen's teeth to suggest that a Prime Minister's days were numbered by anything other than a general election. Journalists found other things to write about. Those days are behind us, hopefully. Not forever. The constant opinion polling, I think, feeds into precisely that phenomenon, this idea that it is interesting how people would vote in a general election that is not going to happen for another 5 years. Just don't ask me why it's interesting. Focus upon my fascinating analysis of what those findings have told us. But so what? It doesn't happen in any other line of work. Not really. The bent media, of course, the way in which Boris Johnson and especially Liz Truss can preside over utterly, utterly rotten administrations and still be cheered to the rafters by the likes of the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph and the Daily Express and the Times and all of their Sunday equivalents. That creates an atmosphere where Keir Starmer had very little chance of delivering, but also where things have to become unconscionably awful before the Conservative Party gets its house in order and actually gets rid of a lame duck leader, as they've managed to do in Johnson and Truss's case, and to a lesser extent, of course, Theresa May. You've got the legacy of Brexit, of course you have. The fact that we have become a country where people have been persuaded that they can vote according to their vibes and their feelings, and in direct contradiction of the experts and the facts, and somehow still be valid and important and possessed of legitimate concerns. The legacy of that will continue until Brexit is undone, I fear. And from Brexit to quick fixes, the idea that you actually can fix things really quickly. Therefore, if the last person hasn't fixed it quickly enough, then we'll try another person now. And that brings us back to change as an end in itself rather than a simple means to an end. You want change, the first question you should be asked is why and what. Whereas, of course, again, echoes of Brexit, the number of people that told us they just had enough, they wanted someone, and it's happening now, of course, with Farage's outfit. We've just had enough, it's time someone else had a go. The two-party system this, the two-party system that. Let's give somebody else a go, because change is as good as a rest, except, of course, if you don't know what that change is going to entail, or what that change is designed to do, or what that change is driven by, or indeed who that change is being paid for by, you are unlikely to come out of it better than you went in. 11:39. Joe's in Enfield in North London. Joe, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi there, James. Yeah,
Hello,
I called in. I've never called into a radio show before, but I
Congratulations. This is it, mate. The rest of your life now is going to be a marked improvement on everything to this point.
Yeah, I saw that, there was the sort of changing of hands and tuned in, and I've heard a few things that you've said before, and I've liked a lot of what you've said, but I found myself sort of ranting and raving a bit at the radio today. I think when you spoke to Michelle a little earlier, I think she did a really good job, and is probably a far more reasonable person than I am. But I think a lot of the reasons that I've heard are somewhat trivializing the issues that working people are facing. Yeah. The idea that people are impatient or spoiled or have an addiction to quick fixes or an addiction to fluxes. They want everything and they want it now. I think all of these things really undermine the pressure that working people are facing. I agree that I do agree that people want quick fixes, but that's not because of Amazon Prime delivery or because they have social media brain. It's because, people can't breathe, James. People can't feed their kids or afford to have kids. They can't pay their mortgages. People can't pay their rent. People are worried about their pensions. The idea that we just need to be more patient, just wait. Trickle down economics will work.
No one has said that. No, I can't fault your analysis up until that point. No one on this programme has extolled the benefits of trickle down economics, not least because it's a completely bogus narrative that should, and of course would, in an honest society, be a completely busted flush. But you speak for a specific section of society that are, I suppose, traditionally Labour supporting, people who are vulnerable, particularly vulnerable to the economic situation, and particularly keen, therefore, to see improvements. That's not going to explain everybody, is it? And the flux addiction, of course, was more about the media than it was about the voters.
Sure. I mean, I think it does speak to a huge part of the population. There are loads of people in this country who don't own their own house, and I think that a lot of people are looking for a solution to this problem, among others. Do you think? I
mean, Andrew's analysis, as ever, was fascinating, and it'll bubble away in my brain for the rest of this programme and beyond. And he touched on two things that speak directly to what you're saying. The first was the really big picture, the fact that we are actually no longer a country or an economy that can deliver for the population some of the things that you described. Now, whether he's right or wrong, I don't think any Prime Minister is going to come out and say, you better get used to being poor. You better get used to not being able to afford all the things that you think you should be able to afford. They're all going to come in and promise to improve the situation. George has been in touch while you were speaking to say literally everyone I know is struggling. So, I mean, that's on the board as a major driver of what we're talking about. But it leads to the idea that a quick fix is possible and that change is desirable before, arguably, the person currently in post has had the chance to try to fix the problems that you describe. So I think we can both be right here. The problems are very, very deep, much deeper than Amazon Prime deliveries or social media addiction. But equally, this addiction to, or this belief that things can be turned around really, really quickly makes everything worse, not better?
I don't know. It's something where, a lot of the things that I think both the left and the right of the political spectrum want is that they're looking for, whether you're on the left and you're thinking, I want a radical change to the tax system where we tax, billionaires and private companies much higher than we do currently, like we used to do in the past. If that were to happen, then, I'd have more money in my pocket and I'd be able to afford a house. So it's sort of, and on the right, it's the case of, if we didn't have, so many immigrants in this country, and we weren't so overpopulated, then, the housing price will fall. There'll be less demand for housing and I'll be able to afford a house. So it's like the reason that we're becoming increasingly more divided and increasingly looking towards having quick fixes is precisely for this reason. People are really struggling, and they've seen what the past Conservative government did, all the way back to Thatcher, really. And the people are sort of like, conditions have sort of gotten gradually worse for a very long time, and so people aren't willing to be patient anymore, and they want to go back to whether it's a country that was more sort of, British white working class that, wants to have less of an overpopulation, or they want to go back to a tax system that meant that, people could buy a house on a single income. It's something where, like, these things existed before.
But neither of those things are going to happen. Neither of those things can happen.
Why do you think neither of those things can happen?
A single income household being able to sustain, I mean, if that were to happen, then the house you'd be able to afford would be going down in value every year, not up.
Yeah, but I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing, is it? If houses are more
if you
affordable?
owned one, it would be. I appreciate you don't, and that's a massive driver of your politics. But I mean, economic growth is contingent upon assets appreciating in value rather than depreciating. If everything that we own starts going down in value, then the sort of happiness on the horizon that you rather powerfully portray is not going to last very long. I mean, you're familiar. I don't want to sound patronising. You're familiar with the concept of negative equity. It's one of the single most terrifying things that the property owning classes, whether they've just bought their own council house or whether they own half of Hampshire, can contemplate. Final question: is it feasible though? This the wealth tax is it's a very nuanced conversation. I think it's probably fair to say that the examples of where it has worked elsewhere are incredibly thin on the ground, but that doesn't stop it being very attractive shorthand for a redistribution of wealth. Your calculation would be that if they raised a significant sum of money by taxing wealth, then your taxes would come down and you'd be left with more money in your pocket to save for a deposit and to get onto the property ladder. I mean, I'm not sure the numbers support that position, but let's say that they did. How long would it take for a government to put in place policies that would measurably and substantively allow you to buy a house? Because I can see why reducing energy bills or reducing the cost of living would help, but not to a point where you can go from being out of the game entirely to be sitting in an estate agent's office this time next week.
I think that you have asked the question why we've seen so many changes in prime ministers, and I think you've sort of answered your own question. That we
didn't replace Boris Johnson with Liz Truss because of people who can't afford houses, and we didn't replace Liz Truss with Rishi Sunak because of people who can't afford houses.
No, I think they were all replaced because they couldn't address the economic issues that
Which brings us back to Brexit.
Sure, that is definitely a contributing factor. But it's like if we can't sort of fix the sort of fundamental issues. Nobody can know. This is where Femi was so powerful earlier. You cannot authentically and sincerely claim to be committed to economic improvement, economic growth, redistribution of wealth while still generating wealth. That's why I think the point about negative equity is important, while completely ignoring by far the biggest drain upon our economic health that this country will hopefully ever see, and certainly short of war has ever seen. But yeah, I mean, obviously there is something a little bit arranging the deck chairs on the Titanic about talking about
why people are buying into the idea that a change of personnel in Downing Street on an almost annual basis is not undesirable. But I don't know that you are necessarily challenging the overall conclusion as powerfully as you think, because people, whatever it is that drives their desire for change, their need for change, they're not going to get it if they change the person in charge 5 times in 4 years. So why do they carry on and keep doing it? Remains, I think, a very pertinent question. Joe, thank you. I hope that's not the last time that you ring into a radio show, albeit that it is the first. Sir Keir Starmer has now formally resigned as Prime Minister after a meeting with the King at Buckingham Palace. The King has accepted his resignation and will now presumably be having a pot of Earl Grey before Andy Burnham arrives to essentially establish his intent to form a government. The time now is 11:48.
James O'Brien on LBC.
You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Joe in Enfield a moment ago touching quite a lot of thought processes with that observation about house prices. I mean, look, it probably would be for the good of the nation, certainly for the younger generations, for house prices to come down. But you're never going to be able to sell that as a policy as a Prime Minister or as a wannabe Prime Minister to a population that is, if not property owning, then aspiring to be so. It is actually what did for Liz Truss in a way, wasn't it? I think the point at which people could see their own mortgages rising exponentially was the point at which the political became personal. And her sandwiches were being wrapped in a road map. I think, just to clarify on that constitutional observation I made a moment ago, I think David Lammy is currently in charge of the country because of this curious period after which Keir Starmer's resignation has been accepted and before Andy Burnham's position as Prime Minister has been confirmed by the King, the role falls to the Deputy Prime Minister, to David Lammy. He could be out of a job entirely, or at least out of the cabinet entirely by tea time today. But for the time being, he is in charge. Kate's in Kingston. Kate, what would you like to say?
James, thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome, Kate.
I'd like to try and put some context into this, if I may, and a bit of an analogy, and you can talk me down or hang up, I don't mind.
I certainly won't hang up.
I hope not. Think of Brexit as getting the menu back. So we got the menu back when Brexit. So people were fed up with having the other menu. So we got the menu back, and it is nearly lunchtime, and everyone's hungry. And then, we choose the menu, and we get persuaded that that's going to be the food, and we buy it, we buy into it, we vote for it, and it's not delivered, and it's horrible. So then we think, well, I'm going to go to another restaurant, I'm going to buy another meal, etc. Now, there's a serious point I'm making here, which is, do you know about Korbinski and the biscuits?
Go on.
Okay, Korbinski was a Polish philosopher, and he did the whole thing about semantics, about words. Now, the map is not the territory, and the menu is not the meal. So one day he's giving a lecture to his students, and they're all sitting there, and it's getting on for lunchtime rather like now, and he had a packet of biscuits, and he said, well, I'm really hungry, excuse me, I must eat a biscuit. So he had a biscuit, and then he said to the front row, would you like a biscuit? And they all had a biscuit. And then 5 minutes later, he held up the front of the packet, and it said dog biscuits. And half of them were sick, and they all rushed to the toilet. The point is that words, the delivery of words, Andy Burnham is so clever because he can use words. His literature degree has helped him. So he can convince people that there's something on the horizon. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, loud and clear. Did you know I can't win, Kate? If I interrupt, I get told off. If I don't interrupt, everyone thinks I've died.
Sorry, James. The phone was beeping. Sorry.
Carry on.
So I'd love to know what his specialist subject was. Can you find out for me his English literature dissertation? I'd love to know what it is.
Am I Google now? Flipping heck. Look it up yourself.
I can't find it on Google.
Oh, can you not?
No. But the thing is about Sir Keir Starmer was very careful with his words.
Yes.
And rather,
loyally, actually.
Like fish, chips, peas, mushy peas, and they're boring. But actually, if you actually got them, they would probably be very good. But the thing is that this persuasion of people and the gap between the stimulus and the response is shorter and shorter. So we've now got a menu where Burnham's very cleverly saying, let's go back to the 70s, which was at least more wholesome. You had your Bieber clothes and everything. But you tended to brew your beer in a dustbin and grow a few things in the back garden. And it was a more wholesome time before Thatcher.
So he's selling something more easily seeable, for want of a better word, than what Keir Starmer never really sold anything.
No, because his father was a toolmaker, and the little I know about toolmaking, because we make things here at home, and when you order cutters, we do. When you order cutters, they're incredibly expensive. If you order things at a set millimetre, like above a millimetre, it's okay. But if you're going to get something made for you bespoke, to buy your cutter to make your thing, that then makes something else, in fact, it gets very expensive. So we get back to money. And I thought the discussion about the economics was very, very good this morning. And Joe, I do really sympathise with Joe.
Same.
And the thing is that people, first of all, they need food on the table. They need some sort of heating. They need to keep themselves clean. And they need to sort of have a mental...
Is this the biggest disconnect of all between, Westminster, if you like, and most people? Because, I think that... I know we often laugh at the Daily Telegraph articles about how hard it is to get by on £100,000 a year and that sort of thing. But it's Mr. McCorber territory. If your outgoings are outstripping your incomings, then it doesn't matter how big your incomings are, you are going to be feeling the pinch. And if a large part of that is, of course, property prices or mortgage payments, then it's kind of non-negotiable unless you rack up the other enormous expense of moving house. So making people feel that the pound in their pocket will go a little bit further, or, to take Joe's point further, a lot further than it currently does, is the top priority of any incoming Prime Minister. But arguably the impossibility of doing so in the current climate, and with Brexit still largely unaddressed and entirely undone, the impossibility of doing so explains why people give them 10 minutes, conclude that they haven't delivered, and then spin the wheel once again, I think, Kate. I hope I kept up with all of your analogies there. I'm a massive fan of analogies, but I think by the time you got to brewing beer in a bucket, I was struggling, I must be honest. If you are, in fact, you could probably see me struggling if you are following this broadcast on in vision, as the grown-ups say. We are broadcasting from Westminster today and streaming live on YouTube, the LBC app, and Global Player. Language is really important. And Kate actually, I think, has given the grounds for the next question that we'll ask, which is, what does Andy Burnham have that Keir Starmer doesn't? 0345 6060 973. So I'm not necessarily going to remove entirely from our contemplation the question of what it means or how we've ended up in a situation where these changes are being undergone at a close to unprecedented level. But I've been struck by two or three things this morning beyond that question, partly as a consequence of Andrew Marr's expert analysis just starting an hour or so ago. The first is, I love the word palpable. It's one of my favourite words. It's a great word, right? Palpable. We love palpable. The very palpable sense of relief as Keir Starmer quit the field. And I'd go a little bit further and say that as him and Victoria, his wife, made their way up the former thoroughfare of Downing Street, the famous former thoroughfare, they had an air of people who were arriving. There was almost a celebratory air. So what's Burnham got that Starmer hasn't?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 3 minutes after 12. Shall I wade straight into the question that will concern us for much, but not all of the next hour? Because, of course, we are keeping one beady eye upon events at Buckingham Palace and latterly at Downing Street. Or shall I annoy you first? What would you rather I did? Because one of the things about change, it sits alongside another phenomenon that I think has got much bigger and possibly worse, but certainly much more commonplace in UK politics in recent years. And as Andy Burnham makes his way to Buckingham Palace, I'll tell you what that is. So it's like a reaction to the addiction to change, because the addiction to change doesn't fit everybody. I don't think I've got it. I would probably have rather stuck where we give someone a decent chance to have a go, even as I found myself deeply disillusioned with Keir Starmer for many of the reasons that Andrew Marr touched upon. The fact that he just, didn't seem to be very interested in doing politics and therefore was not very good at it. And B, just a sense that's become really clear since he decided that the game was up, that he can't really wait to get out of there. But half the population, or 52% of the population, is addicted to change. Oh, Andy Burnham now just arriving at Buckingham Palace with his wife, fully suited and booted, as you would expect. I think it would have been pushing his luck somewhat to go in full Volodymyr Zelensky tribute act, which is the sartorial choice that Andy Burnham normally favours, making his way over the famous gravel. There you go, write that one down, Keith. The famous gravel into Downing Street, where he will shortly be with the King. A couple of carefully selected photographers, one presumably from the Press Association, also going in. So we will see some stills. I don't think we ever see. Did we ever see moving pictures from those moments? And a couple of royal footmen. What's the female equivalent of a footman, Keith? Is it a footwoman? 2 royal foot persons making their way into Downing Street as well. Crowds gathered. Of course, some tourists would have booked these holidays months, if not years ago, so they get a sort of added bonus from the tourist point of view of seeing the new Prime Minister making his way into Buckingham Palace. And it is within that building that he will now be meeting King Charles and seeking permission. I think that's how it works. I think that's the correct nomenclature, seeking permission to form a government, the details and indeed the constituents of which we will discover later today. That's nice from Mike. I should have used that. The royal and august gravel. You could hear crunching underfoot. Crunching underfoot. So 52% of us have become addicted to change. 52% of us have become somewhat addicted to flux, including pretty much all of the media, because it gives us so much to talk and write about. I wondered, looking at some of the very emotional unhappiness, I suppose unhappiness is always emotional, looking at some of the very deep unhappiness about Keir Starmer's defenestration, I wondered whether 48% of us have actually become addicted to sticking. It's a sort of form of footballification, which of course is not just party political. It's not just about the scarf that you've got tied around your neck. Being tied so tightly that it's cut off the flow of blood to your head. It can happen within a political party as well. So some people, I think it's exhausting keeping up with the flux and the change. So if you've decided that you're going to back Keir Starmer to the hilt, regardless of what goes on and regardless of what happens, then I kind of have some sympathy for you. How much of it is a consequence of Keir Starmer's actual abilities and performance, and how much of it is a consequence of being so exhausted by the addiction to flux and change that everybody else is part of? But it's too late for that conversation now. We've got the change that many wanted, including almost all of the Parliamentary Labour Party. And what is that change going to look like? The first way to answer that question would be to look at what Andy Burnham has that Keir Starmer doesn't. Kate in Kingston making a very powerful case for the ability to paint pictures and to tell stories, his use of words, much more lyrical, much more poetic than Keir Starmer's, and whether or not you think these things should matter or not doesn't really register. It matters. And what is it? What else does he have that Keir Starmer doesn't have? Taking Andrew Marr's point about the relish, the clear relish for the job. Did you, even when Keir Starmer was giving his speech, his welcoming speech outside Downing Street, did you have a very, very strong sense that he couldn't wait to get started and that he was desperate to get stuck in and that he would relish every aspect of the job? I mean, danger of suffering from 2020 hindsight here, but I don't think he had the same air of enthusiasm that Andy Burnham appears to have. How long it lasts, only time will tell. But he's really, really, really up for this, and he can't wait to get stuck in. So what else are we going to put on the list? What does Andy Burnham have that Keir Starmer didn't have or doesn't have? The number you need is 03456060973. And listen, it can be a negative as well as a positive. I don't want people mourning the passing of Keir Starmer and convinced that he was a man more sinned against than sinning to feel excluded from this conversation. You're probably bruised enough as it is by the sort of celebratory air that's accompanying Andy Burnham's passage to power. If you're still rueing the day that Keir Starmer felt his position had become untenable, then tell me what he's got as a positive positive that you don't think Andy Burnham has as a negative? What is it that we are going to see different? And obviously, Sophie, long eyelashes may be anatomically correct, but I'm looking for something a little deeper and more substantive than that. What does Andy, because we're all celebrating change, or we're all reporting change, we're all chronicling change, whether you're celebrating it or not. What does Andy Burnham have as a man? Because it's too early, really, to start unpicking conflicting policy platforms or anything like that. But what does Andy Burnham have as he meets with King Charles III in preparation for forming his government later today that Keir Starmer does not have? Why are you excited by this moment? What is it that you think we're going to see moving forwad that we haven't seen over the course of the last 2 and a bit years? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. That's the question that I want to ask next. What is it that Andy Burnham is bringing to the party that Keir Starmer, in your view, did not possess? And, of course, you can also throw in a little bit on whether or not Keir Starmer will prove to be a Prime Minister more sinned against than sinning. For the record, I don't think so. I wobbled horribly. I think it's that 52-48. See, 52% addicted to change, 48% addicted to the opposite, or desperate for the opposite. Everybody else constantly changing the guard. My instincts say, well, just years. Let's measure a premiership in years, not in months. But I fear that Keir Starmer's position became untenable as a consequence of poor performance, of the lack of delivery that has been very well chronicled. So what is Andy Burnham bringing to the party as a person, as a human being, that Keir Starmer signally, in your view, lacked? Or what are we saying goodbye to, regretfully, as Keir Starmer quits the scene, that Andy Burnham is not going to be able to provide or deliver? Norman is in Epsom. Norman, what have you got?
Yeah, so what I've got, James, is that Andy Burnham's a retailer. So I could imagine Andy Burnham being my corner, my high street butcher.
Yeah.
Or he could be a pub landlord.
Are we talking about a common touch? Is that too glib?
He's got that common touch that that people recognise. People can recognise in Andy Burnham. Oh, he's the guy he's got the butcher shop or the he runs the pub. He's got that. Whereas Starmer, nobody could quite pin him down as to he wasn't a toff like Cameron and Johnson.
No, very much not.
He wasn't an English woman of the Shires like Theresa May. Liz Truss is an aberration.
In so many ways.
And Sunak was a tech bro. Those are recognisable characters.
Do we need that? Do we need a categorisation to make sense of things? I think we probably do.
I think we do. And I think Burnham fits a character that we haven't seen in leadership in the UK, probably ever.
Maybe Harold Wilson?
Wilson played up being a common person, but he was an academic professor.
No, very good point. Yeah, so Wilson doesn't work, clamping his pipe into his mouth the minute the cameras started rolling.
Yeah, so he's a top economist, but he knew what the people wanted and he could sell it to them, could sell it back to them, whereas Starmer couldn't quite figure out. He was almost stuck in the 1940s or 50s black and white movie.
Yes, and again, I'm going to say this once more.
And I feel sorry for the guy.
I was going to say, you can believe quite passionately that this shouldn't matter, that this is all optics and surface, not substance. But it matters. It does matter whether you like it or not. This really matters.
It does matter. That connection, that instant first impressions matter. And the first impression of Starmer wasn't good. It never got any better. The first impression of Burnham. Yeah. Now, he's had other impressions because obviously he goes back in politics a long way.
That's true.
But he went to Manchester and reimagined himself back as a Mancunian, probably selling sausages on a high street somewhere in Makerfield, or
just as a son of his community. I mean, Andrew touched on this, and I think I had a similar conversation with Andy Burnham a few years ago about how imposter syndrome defined him really when he moved to London. Worked in the trade press actually in Brentford of all places, where I currently live, and and always had political ambitions, but possibly lost sight of why. Of why he had political ambitions and, of course, who he was. And the big question is whether or not his experiences as a consequence of Hillsborough and of being mayor of Manchester have changed him properly and profoundly.
I think I've got it, James. So he went to Cambridge and tried to be someone else.
I think I've got that bit of the interview, actually. We'll play it out.
Okay, sorry, I haven't heard the interview.
No, I mean, no reason you should have done it. It went out on full disclosure a while ago. We'll play it out in a moment, because I'm keeping one eye at this moment on the Downing Street door, where Andy Burnham and Mary France, his wife, Mary France Van Heel, are expected to emerge any second now, at which point he is officially Prime Minister. I think we might run the risk, actually. Should we take a quick break on the proviso that he ain't going to appear? Of course, the world's, including our cameras, are focused on that doorway. So the minute that I signal to Keith that we're taking a break, Andy Burnham and his wife will probably appear.
James O'Brien on LBC.
16 is the time. I think what we'll do is we will wait until Andy Burnham emerges from Buckingham Palace, which means there's still time for you to tell me what you think he has that Keir Starmer does not, whether good or bad. And then we'll have a little listen to certainly one clip where he spoke to me a few years ago about his parents encouraging him to go to Cambridge and the imposter syndrome that he suffered from subsequently, a syndrome that Andrew Marr persuaded us earlier has gone. He knows who he is now, and he knows what he wants, and that is as a consequence both of securing the Hillsborough bill that was enshrined in law last week, and of course as his tenure as mayor of Manchester. He has, he is arriving in Downing Street with a fairly long to-do list, and some of it has been fleshed out, regardless of what Stuart Rose said a minute ago. When are we going to stop listening to Stuart Rose? I wonder. The bloke that was supposedly leading the Remain campaign and disappeared from the field almost as completely as Jeremy Corbyn did. But hey-ho, on we go. Quite a lot of plans and intentions and putative policies laid out already, rather more than you'd expect from somebody who only got the final nod a couple of weeks ago, but we'll find out more about that, of course, in the course of today and in the coming weeks. But I'm interested at first glance in what it looks like and sounds like, and what Andy Burnham has that Keir Starmer does not. I think we can probably risk that clip, actually. I don't think he's going to come. They'll be there for 20 minutes, half an hour, won't they? I mean, they have to have a proper chat, get to know each other, show him the chinoiserie. If you're wondering what the chinoiserie is and why there is so much of it in Buckingham Palace, don't forget you can rewind this live broadcast on Global Player and on the LBC app. So here he is, and I'll pull out of this if he comes out of Downing Street and maybe go back to it later. Here he is talking to me about that imposter syndrome, which many people who know him better than I do feel is A, a large part of his story, and B, something that has actually now been dealt with.
Tell me about when the teacher said to you, you should be aiming for Cambridge, Burnham.
I mean, it came via a parents' night at first. My mum and dad came home for a parents' night, and they said that Mr. Harrington, the English teacher, had mentioned Cambridge, and he wanted to talk to me about it. And I just said, no, that wouldn't be me. And that's when my dad started, oh, God, it will open all these doors. And
Why wouldn't it be you? Just because it was like Brideshead Revisited?
Yeah, but my impressions of it were just, I thought, well, I won't fit in there. And I was kind of right, to be honest with you, because I really struggled my first year. I was, I've had that imposter syndrome all my life to some degree or other. And, I had it massively in my first year at Cambridge. I was waiting for listen, we have made a mistake and we don't want you to feel, here's the door and, have a good
Even
life.
with your A-level results in your back pocket and all that sort of thing.
Yes, it was just, the way I always describe it was I just was exposed to sort of a kind of an environment that nothing in my school had prepared me for it.
See, everything in my school would have prepared me for that. So I find this fascinating because our backgrounds aren't that different up until the point that I went to private school. Yeah. My dad was on a Yorkshire regional newspaper when he was 15. So, but that's why parents do it, to give you that false confidence. And I think you clocked, you clocked that it was actually clothes that people put on, this confidence. It's not something that's innate or something that you're born with.
Well, it took me 2 years to work that out. As I say, that when I first arrived in Cambridge, I'd never seen confidence.
Were you frightened? I mean,
it was intimidating for certain. And, in the world I was in, you wouldn't have dreamt of said, I want to go to Cambridge, I want to be a Member of Parliament, because you just...
You get a slap.
You'd be ripped to pieces. I mean, so you wouldn't have ever spoken of your ambition. Whereas all of a sudden I would speak in the most confident way. It took me a good 2 years to work out they were talking complete rubbish, but it sounded so good.
Yes.
It sounded...
And they would not think twice about telling you that they fully intended to be Prime Minister one day.
And that was quite hard to kind of come to terms with that. But, I do think I would, always come back to that interview process. That's the thing that, how can you go, even now from a state school, into that interview process? I was offered a glass of sherry, for God's sake, at St Catherine's College. I failed that interview. No bloody wonder.
Yeah.
I was in a kind of wood-panelled, book-lined room being offered a glass of sherry. And the first question of the interview was, I can remember it now, the tutor or director of study said, to what extent do you think the Canterbury Tales is like a modern-day package holiday? And I just sat there with this sherry in my hand and looked at him. I'm not sure I spoke for I always say I was still pondering the question when the rejection letter landed on the door. There was nothing in my life to that point that had prepared me for that experience. Nothing. Not one thing. And so I just... when I got called back for a pool interview at Fitzwilliam College, which was had more of a tradition of state school intake, I was a bit, I've got a bit of a sort of a streetwise side that I kind of had, right, if that's the game, I'm coming back a bit better this time.
Hard not to like him there, isn't it? That's an interview from 2022 on Full Disclosure, which you can find and indeed watch. I think it's all in Vision. You can watch that on the archive. If it isn't, it probably will be by close of play today. Particularly interesting. I could be imagining this because, of course, I've not watched it before. I'm watching the clip in the studio at the moment at the same time that you are. But when I mentioned Prime Minister, there was a little... Going back 4 years, it was already being talked about one day. Obviously, it would have been later rather than sooner. But I think he had the air of a man on that particular question who had not actually ruled out the possibility or the prospect of becoming Prime Minister one day. So that was him talking about who he is, actually. And I think, because we're asking the question about what Andy Burnham has that Keir Starmer doesn't, I think one of the reasons why Keir Starmer felt compelled to repeatedly tell us that his father was a toolmaker, and no reason why he shouldn't. It's an extraordinary journey, a very, very British success story, the Starmer family story. But he needed to, because as Norman in Epsom pointed out, it was kind of hard to pinpoint where he's from socially. It was kind of hard to categorise him, or if you prefer, pigeonhole him. And Andy Burnham is a much easier. This is why Norman was talking about being a butcher or being a retailer. Everybody knows somebody like him. Everybody knows somebody like him, whereas I don't think many of us know anybody quite like Keir Starmer, for good or for ill. As I say, I'm just sticking it down on paper today, not necessarily sitting in judgment, although I am currently a lot more excited about the prospect of an Andy Burnham premiership than I ever was about a Keir Starmer's. That question there, that will be tomorrow's phone-in from 10 o'clock. To what extent do you think the Canterbury Tales is like a modern-day package holiday? I'll be taking your calls on that from 10 o'clock tomorrow, 0345 606 973. But for now, I'm asking what Andy Burnham has, what we think Andy Burnham has, that that Keir Starmer doesn't. Nathaniel is in Dover. Nathaniel, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I think you've got a new book out of what's going on at the moment.
Oh, I'll tell you who wishes you were right, mate. That's my publisher. He's emailed me already this morning. I'm hiding from him at the moment. Go on. Why do you think that?
Because you said about the flux and what's going on. The more turmoil, the more you've got to write about why Britain is so broken.
Well, good for business, mate, but bad for the soul. I don't want to live in a country where we're changing Prime Minister every 10 minutes, and I actually don't want to live in a country where there's so much to talk. I'll tell you what, I've already got The Crown. This is the most listened to speech programme in the history of British commercial radio. I'll let someone else have a go. I'll give up 250,000 listeners if we can have a period of prosperity and stability. There you go. know.
I agree. There is a couple of things which I think we are going to miss from Keir Starmer.
Yes.
And I didn't think I'd be ever saying this, right? On the international stage, he is a different creature to someone stood at number 10 or at Prime Minister's questions. He had that fortitude about him when talking about Ukraine, when dealing with NATO, or to a degree, America, but not so much. It sort of felt like he was trying to do too much to please Trump a little bit. But on the international stage, I think actually he would make a fantastic diplomat. He absolutely would. What we're not going to miss is the abhorrent communication. Yeah. I've never known number 10 to be so poor at communicating about the good things they were doing. I really could never put my finger on it. It didn't make sense to me that they were just not shouting from the rooftops about the good that they were trying to do.
And I mean, indeed, in the context of communications, Nathaniel, as you speak, Andy Burnham has been appointed Prime Minister. The Palace has issued the statement. His Majesty received in audience the Right Honourable Andrew Burnham MP and requested him to form a new administration. The Right Honourable Andrew Burnham MP accepted the King's offer and kissed hands, it says here, upon his appointment as Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury. Ms. Marie-France Van Heel was also received by His Majesty. I think, I don't know if you listened to Andrew Marr earlier, but as ever, he was incredibly insightful. And part of the problem there would be Keir Starmer not relishing or enjoying politics itself, because if you're not enjoying the game, you're unlikely to do many laps of honour when you score a goal. And that's the communications failure, is that even the good stuff didn't get sold as enthusiastically and as tirelessly as it should have been.
And I think if you enjoy your job, you do it 5 times better. You always do.
Oh, tell me about it.
I think one thing that Andy Burnham has got, which isn't Keir Starmer's fault, it's just the situation. Keir Starmer is very London-orientated. And I think there was a difficulty to truly grasp what was going on outside of the M25. Yeah. And where Andy Burnham, like you had in that clip, he's gone and remade himself. He's gone up to Manchester, where before he was a bit London-centric under the Blair years. I think he's gone away and he's remoulded himself to actually understand what's going on where there isn't all the London money, so to speak.
Which is grossly unfair. Because I mean, we touched on it there. I think Andy Burnham's upbringing was in many ways more comfortable than Keir Starmer's, actually. But it doesn't matter, does it? We're not here to count or do the maths. We're here to talk about how these two men make us feel. And Andy Burnham makes us feel currently very different from how Keir Starmer does.
And I feel hopelessly optimistic, and I've not felt this way.
Hopelessly optimistic. There's a title. Crikey.
I've not felt this way since probably the end of the 2000s, when I was coming out of secondary school and I found a credit crunch. That was the last time I had some sort of hopeless optimism until the credit crunch happened. So I'm just hoping that it's not misplaced, and I'm actually hoping that I can garner a future for my kids.
I mean, the last time we had a politics, I mean, I suppose we've had a populist, haven't we, with Boris Johnson? But in terms of, and then we had a toff with David Cameron, we had an opportunist with Boris Johnson, we had an aberration with Liz Truss, we had a technocrat with Rishi Sunak, and we had, I mean, I don't know quite what word I'd use at this point to describe.
I think I can describe it.
Go on.
I've been thinking about this. I can describe it. So, you know, with Rishi Sunak, we had that sort of populist post-COVID nonsense going on, post-Brexit, and then Keir Starmer went the complete opposite and went technocrat. With Andy Burnham, I think there's a chance to have a recalibration of the political sphere. And I think there's a chance to recalibrate this, because he isn't populist, he isn't far left, he isn't like conservative. I actually think he brings a middle ground, what Keir Starmer missed. Keir Starmer went too far formal, too managerial, instead of going, actually, you know what, I'm not going to be populist post-COVID Boris Brexit wave nonsense. All we had to do was dial it from 15 on the dial down to about 7.
That's beautifully
put. I think Andy Burnham does that.
I don't think Starmer had any choice. I don't think Starmer could have done different. It would have been like asking him to suddenly start speaking Mandarin. It was just not a language that he spoke, whereas Andy Burnham is not faking it. In some ways, a couple of the callers this hour put me in mind that Andy Burnham is exactly what Nigel Farage pretends to be. He's somebody who is in touch with the reality and the concerns of ordinary people. I don't think we're going to be finding out anytime soon that Andy Burnham has taken a secret 5 million quid from a foreign-based billionaire whose business interests are then miraculously served by announcements made by said politician. And similarly, I mean, this is where we go back to communications. I don't think we're going to find out anytime soon that he's taken some freebies or some gifts from members of the House of Lords, albeit that they're Labour members of the House of Lords. There's quite a few things that he has to do differently, but the first thing that he has done and will continue to do is just be different. And you've touched on quite a lot of the ways in which he is already achieving that. Nathaniel, great stuff. Thank you. As far as I can tell, Andy Burnham is still in Buckingham Palace. Perhaps he stayed for lunch. It's 12:31. Amelia Cox has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:34. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you're just joining us, we are broadcasting from Westminster today, as you'd expect, and live streaming, which means you can see me, on YouTube, the LBC app and global player. Andy Burnham, the Prime Minister, as he is now, is still in Buckingham Palace with the King and indeed with his wife, Marie-France Van Heel. You can see, if you are interested in these things, cameras currently focused upon the doorway from which Andy Burnham and his wife are expected to emerge sooner rather than later. It's then a sort of hop, skip and a jump back to Downing Street, where they'll go in the back way and then make their way, and then Burnham will make his way through the building, his new home, of course, and deliver a speech from the street itself. A speech which everybody who does this for a living is expecting not to involve a lectern. Make of that what you will. Optics matter. As our last caller reminded us, communication skills were widely perceived as one of the big failings of Keir Starmer's premiership, and that is very much a message being sent to the watching public, to the watching world. Andy Burnham, by eschewing a lectern, if indeed he does so. It's not just me who thinks this, by the way. Andrew Marr said so too, so it must be true. It is announcing that things are going to be different now. Respect to Paul for my favourite message of the day, that David Lammy missed a trick there while he was in charge of the country for about 20 minutes. He should have rejoined the EU. Could have just got it done and dusted. And this is nice, Nadine. This warmed the cockles of my bitter and cynical heart. James, she writes, I love you on days like these. You speak around all the thoughts in my head. I'm not a fan of change, and I do harbour concerns about Burnham, but with Starmer seeming pleased to be going, let's bring on the new. I hope it actually does bring hope and opportunity, particularly for young people. A lovely and generous thing to say, Nadine. We will find out relatively soon, I suppose. Before that, Maya is in Brentwood to address the question of what we think Burnham has that Starmer doesn't. For good, I would remind you, or for ill. Maya, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
It's Maya, by the way, not Maya.
Sorry, Maya.
But as you were. That's okay.
Sorry, Maya. I said sorry, Maya, then. Sorry, Maya.
It's okay. I've had it my whole life, but I thought, why not?
Well, drop the A. No, I can't tell you to start spelling your name differently. I'll just make a note. Can we put a note on, in case Maya rings again, can we put a note on how to pronounce her name? Now, where were we?
So, first of all, I've got no disrespect for Keir Starmer at all. I think he is a very decent human being. I think he did fail, unfortunately, for a number of reasons. In terms of what I think Andy Burnham has got that he doesn't, and I say I'm going to list these, but I'm saying this, and I really pray and hope that he uses these tools that I believe he's got. He is relatable. He is bold. He will be and can be a very good orator. And when do you remember? I don't know if it was after the by-elections where Keir Starmer made a speech. And he said, and I felt for him so much, he said, I get it.
Yeah.
I feel it. And my heart almost broke for him because it came over so terribly, like he didn't get it and he didn't feel it. And I really wished, and I think he probably practiced that 20 times, but still didn't get it right. I feel that if we are a country in pain at any time, I think you'll be able to see that Andy Burnham is feeling that pain. And so I think he needs to hold on.
See, I think Keir Starmer did get it. You didn't believe him when he said that he did.
Exactly. And you know, maybe that's just his personality, and I don't think it's a reason, you know, to hate him for it or hound him out of his seat. But anyway, we are where we are. But no, it didn't come across like he got it, and it didn't come across like he felt it. And, and I'm not going to harp on about this next point, but it does hurt me a lot. And it was the thing that stopped me from voting for Labour last time. When he reacted the way that he reacted, when Gazans were deprived of water, and you'll know what I'm talking about.
But that was after he became. That can't be why you didn't vote for Labour last time. That was after he became Prime Minister.
No, but the stance that he was taking on it is what made me stop. I just couldn't. But I felt that he wasn't acting from the heart.
Yeah.
I felt as a human rights lawyer, he wasn't acting from the heart.
That's interesting.
I think Andy Burnham should act from the heart, and I think he will. And I think when he does, it will really connect. And I don't think it's going to be easy because
he is currently waving. Whether it's from the heart or not, only time will tell. But I'm interrupting you, Maya, just to report that Andy Burnham is now leaving Buckingham Palace. You can hear the audio feed of that moment, I think, in the background. His wife, Marie-France Van Heel, with him as this extraordinarily speedy and successful coup, because it has been a coup. It was an assault upon Keir Starmer's leadership that began when his ambitions were scuppered. In the Gorton and Denton by-election, I think, he sought to run there and was prevented from doing so by the NEC, ended up fighting Makerfield and winning in such spectacular fashion that Keir Starmer, I think, saw that the writing on the wall was not going to be erased anytime soon. So we can now call it the Prime Ministerial Convoy is now leaving Buckingham Palace, crossing the august gravel, as my earlier texter suggested we should refer to it, and making its way back to Downing Street, where if precedence is to be observed, they will... they don't drive up the thoroughfare, not least because you can't really these days. There's gates at both ends, but they'll go in the back way, and then Burnham will emerge shortly onto the street and deliver his speech, which Natasha Clark will be, because these are historic moments, even if they're coming around with extraordinary regularity at the moment. They remain historic moments, and Natasha Clark will be there to witness it in person. As a relatively young political editor, Natasha, what's your tally now? How many have you done?
Oh, goodness me, James. Well, I've done a fair few prime ministers now at LBC. We've seen Rishi Sunak, Keir Starmer, and now Andy Burnham, and that's just in the time I've been at LBC, so 3 years. But yes, my first prime minister when I sort of came into political journalism was David Cameron, and that's only a decade ago. So it's all pretty quick. I'm seeing more prime ministers than hot dinners, as some people have been saying this week. And James, some more new information to tell you, and to be fair, as you've been saying this morning, I can confirm there's no lectern, no podium outside number 10 Downing Street at the moment. So we are expecting Andy Burnham to not speak from that at all when he comes from the palace in the next few minutes. And as you say, he has now become Prime Minister. He's been asked to form a government by His Majesty the King, and all of his supporters are now on Downing Street waiting for him to arrive. I've just met Steve Rotherham, who, as you know, is a very good ally of Andy Burnham. I've just met his very small grandchild, who is here to witness the occasion. They've all come down from Liverpool, all of the family today, and are absolutely all delighted to be there to see their friend Andy Burnham take political office. You'll of course remember that Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham are long-term allies. They go back a long time. They've written a book together. They've been mayors together, and now together to see Andy Burnham take up his post in Downing Street. And like I say, James, the mood here getting pretty elated as all of Andy Burnham's supporters gather just behind me. I'm not seeing any political appointees, however. We did, of course, see Rachel Reeves. We saw David Lammy, all of Keir Starmer's top team earlier today outside number 10. There are very few politicians behind me. I imagine this is exactly the kind of atmosphere that the new incoming Prime Minister wants to portray. This is all about showing that he's, quotes, just Andy, this man of the people, this person who is going to come into Downing Street with his so-called Makerfield test, and to really show that he is going to continue to have one foot firmly planted up in the north of England with those normal people on the street, not politicians, not special advisors all telling him what to do. He's going to be just Andy.
So who are these people then? They are invited supporters. Has there been a changing of personnel? The people that were accompanying, providing the background to Keir Starmer's speech were largely Downing Street workers and well-wishers. They've all gone, have they now? And they've been replaced by Andy Burnham's team, as it were.
Yeah, that's right. I can spot Sacha Lord, friend of LBC, in the audience, and nighttime economy czar and advisor to Andy Burnham. He's here in the crowds. I can also see Dale Vince. He was there at Andy Burnham's confirmation, coronation, as it were, on Friday when he was appointed Labour leader. Like I say, there's lots of friends and family of Andy Burnham. We're expecting to see his wife, Marie-France, as well here, and Andy Burnham's 3 children as well. They are grown-up children, expecting to see them as well here on Downing Street in the next few minutes as well. But like I say, these are meant to be more ordinary people, less politicians, more of, the people that Andy Burnham. And we're expecting. Oh, I can see the car turning in now. Andy Burnham's car coming in, fresh from the palace, fresh from Buckingham Palace. He is now turning into Downing Street. We're about to see him step out of the car in just a few minutes. I imagine the crowd behind me is going to be going wild in a second.
Keith, write that down. That's 4 mistakes today so far in 3 hours. That's not bad going, but I thought.
Well, I've made a few too, James. Well, my podium lectern moment as well.
No, I wouldn't worry about
write that down.
There could easily have been a podium, but I thought, I don't know why I thought that they parked up round the back and then came out the front of the building. But as Natasha points out, the prime ministerial convoy now making its way up. So that's actually chalked that one up as a mistake for Andrew Marr, because it is a thoroughfare.
Andy Burnham's just getting out of the car, James.
Here he is, Prime Minister Andy Burnham.
Prime Minister walking up Downing Street, accompanied by his wife. He looks absolutely delighted.
We will obviously be staying with this as Andy Burnham shakes the hands of some of the assembled friends and supporters, all of whom will have been invited to witness this extraordinary moment that felt a very, very long way away, as recently as even 6 months ago. And as I mentioned a moment ago, early attempts.
Andy Burnham and his wife Marie-France posing for pictures, shaking hands with supporters, having a few hugs and.
Indeed.
He's shaking hands with supporters who have lined up on Downing Street ready to see this momentous occasion.
And now the prospect of the first ever prime ministerial lecternless address from the Downing Street tarmac. Although, given some of the things that we've been discussing for the last few minutes, I suspect that this moment will be properly indulged and properly enjoyed by Andy Burnham and his wife, Marie-France. Some of these people, of course, will have been colleagues and supporters of his back in his Westminster days. Others coming to the team during his Manchester mayoralty, which has been such an immense and integral part of what's widely seen now as a political transformation. At the very heart of which is that imposter syndrome that we spoke about together 4 years ago, which Andrew Marr referred to just under 2 hours ago, and which Andy Burnham has always spoken of very honestly. It's tough in this country, in this class-riddled country, to move between classes, which is what a young man like Andy Burnham was required to do when he went off to Cambridge University, originally, as you heard, against his own wishes, but very much at the encouragement of his parents and his father, and he felt horribly out of place when he got there, surrounded by people who went to public school and were taught from a very early age that it was entirely reasonable for them to, and there's the baby that we suggested, would almost say, didn't actually kiss the baby, but he kissed the man holding the baby. That's Steve Rotherham, isn't it? As Natasha mentioned, he's brought his grandchild with him, and just waiting now for the greetings and the congratulations to be completed before Andy Burnham delivers his first address as Prime Minister. And I think it might be a slightly more interesting one than some previous incumbents have provided, not least because this determination to represent proper change and to offer something truly and measurably different is at the very, very heart of his project. Beginning with, and yes, it's a little bit gimmicky, it's very much optics, but beginning with this decision to not do so from behind a lectern. So it's just a microphone. It's just a big microphone that you won't even see in shot, I don't think, when he begins speaking, which I expect him to do in the next few seconds. And here he is, Prime Minister Andy Burnham.
Thank you. I have just come from Buckingham Palace, where I have accepted His Majesty the King's invitation to form a government. In doing so, I am acutely conscious that I am the 6th person in the last 10 years to walk up this street, the 7th Prime Minister since 2016, making this a moment for reflection and new resolution. It requires my generation of politicians to raise our game and rise to the new challenge. Britain needs to show the world that we can regain our stability once again. And that is our challenge, to make politics work, to make it work better. I know people at home are fed up with politics. I hear you, and I want to be honest with you. We have not been good enough, and we need to be better. We will be. We will make this moment a circuit breaker for Britain, bringing forward the biggest changes in the last 40 years. A new political model and a new economic model. In the 1980s, Britain took some wrong turns. Political power was centralised, economic power privatised, large parts of the country deindustrialised, and they still haven't recovered. Many feel as though they're still in decline, and they don't have the ability to turn things around. And that's why we will change politics, to make it more collaborative, more about problem solving than point scoring. And we will take power out of here and carry it into every postcode in the land so that they can do more. And in doing more, build a new economy where we put life's essentials back under stronger public control to make them affordable to you again. Reindustrialising Britain, using public procurement to back British industry. Later this year, I will bring forward a new plan for Britain, a 10-year plan, laying out a path from where we are now to where I believe we all want Britain to be, wherever we're coming from, whatever party we support. But I can do something to give people some breathing space now, some help with the cost of living. And I will set out some of those measures starting tomorrow, including how we pay for them. We will help more young people into work by changing the education system and giving them more support, more mental health support. And we will build more council homes. That is the fair and sustainable way to bring the welfare bill down, to meet our fiscal rules and to honour our commitments on defence to our international partners. We will help people to live well, building a more preventative state, investing in people's success rather than paying for failure. And that work starts now. I will soon go through that door behind me and issue my first instruction to end rough sleeping in our country. It's about putting the right values and the right standards at the heart of government. I will put the care of people at the heart of everything I do. I will give this my all, and I ask you all to pull with me. Let's build a new national sense of unity, of common purpose and positivity. Let us make this the moment when Britain starts to believe again, the moment we bring back hope. Thank you very much, everybody.
And there it is, Andy Burnham's first speech to the nation as Prime Minister, containing, one specific policy pledge, which is a little rare, and otherwise, with regards to the cost of living, pretty much doing what Andrew Marr told us a couple of hours ago he would do as he came out of the block, speaking directly to the pound in your pocket. So two things, Andrew, who is joining us now live from Downing Street. There's the style and the substance. The style, the decision not to have a lectern, and the substance, the clear articulation of what his priorities will be.
Absolutely. I don't think we've had a Prime Minister. We've had a lot walking down this street, as you heard. I don't think we've had one who's promised to take power away from it and into the rest of the country. Fairly familiar messages from Andy Burnham, including on public control of water and other utilities. An interesting announcement that his first effort would be to end rough sleeping, an anti-rough sleeping campaign, very like he did in Manchester. And a 10-year plan coming. We've had many, many plans, but another plan coming later in the summer. We won't really know very much about the detailed direction until we get the names of the cabinet ministers. Yvette Cooper has apparently been inside the building for some purpose already, but we don't know any more yet.
She's an ally of Burnham's historically?
Is she an ally?
Yeah.
Well, she's somebody, her position is very interesting. Lots and lots of big men have been angling for her job. David Miliband, most obviously, but plenty more. But there are people who say, actually, she's done very well. More hoots of applause behind me. He's enjoying his second round with the crowd. One thing I should say, James, there he is again. In terms of the different vibe, yes, you can tell that an awful lot of people are not from London. A huge crowd of people from the north behind me. And you can tell them they're from the north because they're better dressed, they're smarter than we sloppy southerners.
I wondered where you were going with that, Andrew Marr, but I'm perfectly happy with where you ended up. Yeah. Although Andy Burnham has, of course, not been always suited and booted in the way that many politicians are, and there is the footage of them coming into Downing Street for the very first time, and of course we forget
that is the moment.
It's his home now. It's their home now, as well as their office, as well as his office.
I'm losing you there, James, but I'm just going to say that the team inside number 10 will be very unfamiliar. Most of the key people who were there with Keir Starmer have left already. They were there to cheer him out. They have gone. There's an entirely new team here. And we in the media have been shepherded around very expertly by people we don't actually know very well at the moment. That's going to be a familiar feeling right across Whitehall from now on.
But it will soon change as journalists like you begin to forge new relationships and make or develop new contacts. Andrew Marr, as you would expect, and as always, providing sterling service from Downing Street, as indeed has Natasha Clark. Today, our political editor, and as we have been telling you all morning, those cabinet appointments will begin almost immediately. Make of that speech what you will. Asma Miriam for Sheila next will no doubt be inviting your first impressions of Andy Burnham's premiership, but there is little doubt that he intends to hit the ground running. And as Andrew once again reminded us, that pledge regarding rough sleeping is an echo of what he has achieved as Mayor of Manchester, and the flesh upon those bones that we await now will become clearer as those appointments are made. The direction of traffic, just to mix my metaphors slightly, the direction of traffic set to be in large part determined by who is in the vehicle with him. But I suppose if you wanted to take away one or two major moments or major elements of both that speech and Andy Burnham's arrival in Downing Street, it is that this is not a passing on of the baton. Sometimes when a sitting Prime Minister is replaced without a general election, it can be a continuation rather than a departure from what has gone before. But Andy Burnham clearly feels and intends to deliver a very different mode of government, style of government, and indeed ambition of government from what we have seen under Keir Starmer. Another correction, to go back to the very beginning of this morning's programme, you will be messaging me now, indeed you are, to claim that Downing Street does actually have a letterbox. It doesn't work. You can't put anything through it. So I was right. It's not a letterbox. It looks like a letterbox. It's the illusion of a letterbox, but it doesn't actually do what a letterbox should do. Only time will tell whether Andy Burnham is currently providing the illusion of a Prime Minister who intends to be measurably different, the illusion of a Prime Minister who intends to signal and deliver meaningful change, or whether or not he is the real deal. That is it from me for today. You can listen back on our free Global Player app or the LBC app. You can, of course, watch back as well and stay up to date with all the latest news, videos and opinion. There's a dizzying range of podcasts available there as well. So download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Tom Swarbrick back in his familiar chair from 4, but now standing in for Sheila Fogarty, it's Asma Mir.
James O'Brien on LBC.